Good afternoon, everyone. Wednesday, February 3rd. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. Today is Education Day. Bill's going to both our Education Subcommittee as well as our Early Childhood Subcommittee. We have 10 bills before us today. We have about 35 people testifying, more than half on one bill. We will start with House Bill 266 from Delegate Cox. We are joined today by Appropriations because they too are on this bill. So welcome to Delegates Solomon, Forbes, and new delegate Novotny, as well as their staff, Michelle Lambert. So those of you from Appropriations, of course, also please let us know if you have questions at any time on this bill, and we'll start with Delegate Cox. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Washington, honorable members of the committee. It's an honor to appear in front of you today on behalf of the children of Maryland. House Bill 266 does a simple thing. It just says that if there remains closed schools, whether fully or partially, that there's a scholarship program that parents of students can apply for to use those funds during the time that the school is closed. This is not a voucher program. This is more like a refund of the taxes, because not every parent can homeschool and not every child is able to fully invest in the virtual school experience. Hopefully, my witness that is signed up to testify will elaborate on that more fully. Miss Alexis Haslip, who did, young lady in school who did submit, she's a sophomore, she did submit testimony written as well to explain some the incredible difficulties that she and her siblings have gone through for the last 11 months. But I'm sure most of us are aware of those issues. And so the question is, what do we do about it and how do we handle it? I think this is a reasonable approach. There are many similar approaches suggested, but my approach does not defund the school system. It does provide a scholarship program, and it is narrow in the sense that it's for the time being of the school closure in that district or partial closure, to allow these kids to have opportunities that they can't necessarily afford otherwise. Schools, we need to remember too, schools are open everywhere. Private schools have been open the entire year for the most part in most counties in Maryland. Across the country, the schools tend to be open in most states and have been since August. There have been sometimes rolling districts that have been hit harder than others that have had to shut. But you could see that on the maps. If you pull that up on the different educational search engines, you can see exactly that most of the time those are targeted areas for closure and not statewide closures or countywide closures. For instance, if you look at the actual shutdown models, the only schools that have been completely shut down, there's only about 3 jurisdictions that have been shut down in America even at this moment. And many states have had orders, several states have had orders mandating that all schools be open since August or September, such as since the fall for Florida, in Texas as well, and Iowa have been fully open and operating. And then if you go west of the Mississippi, most of these kids have been in school at least multiple days a week for in-person class, as well as athletics. So their athletics are continuing, their opportunities for college are continuing, and in some ways they're far ahead of Maryland students to the detriment of our great kids. So I'd like to remedy that. The private schools here have been open, there's opportunities there. I think that this shows a reasonable partnership approach to allow students to have that opportunity that they may not be able to afford otherwise. To either use the money for a private or homeschool opportunity temporarily, and then to provide a vehicle that these schools that may need to begin opening more slowly don't need to feel the pinch of large classroom sizes, because students have these multiple opportunities. We need to protect children. I know that you all believe this, that otherwise you wouldn't have had the enjoyment of serving with this great committee and the educational work that you do for Maryland. And I don't need to remind you of the fact that the Constitution of Maryland is explicit that one of the duties that we have as legislators is to fund our public schools. Article 8, the education article in our Constitution, mandates it. In fact, I'll just read briefly in closing. that the General Assembly, Section 1, shall create, inform, and fund a system of free public schools, and shall provide by taxation or otherwise. And then it goes on to say that the funds for the public schools shall be used as the General Assembly dictates and appropriated for the purposes of education. And I think the reason why Section 3 does not limit that phraseology to public education is sometimes there might need to be public-private partnerships that can make opportunities available for the students of Maryland, because the goal that we all have, whether it's private school, homeschool, or public school, the goal is to make sure that kids are safe and that kids are provided the education that will help them be better citizens and to have the opportunities that all of us deserve and that all of us have had and that they deserve. And I just want to close with this, and hopefully my witness will be able to join us. I don't see her yet, or whether she's in the waiting room, I'm not sure. But one of the things that she hopefully will be able to highlight is just the fact that she's just a representative of what we all know has happened. And maybe some of us have had children, as I have had, the similar experiences of having complete cutoff of friends, activities greatly limited. But most discouraging to me, and when I read her testimony, was that the way that this has had to work for their family and for many families like hers is that the parents have had to work to be able to keep their living. And so these kids have been at school, as thousands of kids in Maryland have had to be for the last 11 months in their house by themselves in front of a screen. And we know that that's not the best model. There are ways that we can make sure that kids have opportunities if that doesn't work for them. You might hear from some from time to time that where that does work, that's great. But for the vast majority, it does not work. And the different articles that I've submitted from the Brookings Institution, the Washington Post, and other studies indicate that the impact of this kind of a lockdown and shutdown on the students is generational. For instance, in the Brookings study, they indicated that they did a systemic crisis model from students from World War II, which had a similar lockdown experience. And 40 years later, those individuals were still reporting significant impact of negative impact in their lives. So I think we all understand that this is serious. We know that. I don't have to underscore that. But what's the way out? How do we help these kids? And I think that the Constitution provides this opportunity. And I think that this bill is a reasonable approach to make that happen for students. And so I'd urge your approval of it. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Delegate Cox. Any questions? All right, seeing no questions, first invite up Vince McAvoy. Mr. McAvoy, are you here? I see you. You just need to unmute. All right, how about Alexis Haslip? All right. Looking again for Alexis, who's not here, and Mr. McAvoy, go ahead. You're unmuted. You can go.
Okay, grateful. Thank you so much. And Delegate, I want to thank your staff as well. They're very gracious to me and getting me in here with my technical difficulties. And unfortunately, having some now, but hopefully we'll be able to work through it the next couple of minutes. So can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I want to speak in favor of Delegate Cox's bill. The benefit to this is, of course, for the children. This past year, children have faced consequences that we've never seen in modern days, and they've been removed from their schools. They've been removed from the society of their friends, sports, and all types of things. And there has been this sort of stop and start going on in the various jurisdictions. What I appreciate about Delegate Cox's is that it's going to make some allowance, as many parents have opted to go in different directions to see to the needs of their kids. And these are very individual needs. They're family by family, schedule by schedule, age by age. And so I strongly encourage this stopgap measure, and hopefully things will level out. Um, the election season's over. We'll be exiting the flu season, hopefully for the entire year in the next month or so. Schools are being put back into play as of March by the governor. But we must have some allowances for this major disruption. This is certainly one way. And in closing, what I want to say is that we have a social contract. My parents, and I'm sure many other parents, moved. They made sacrifices, did without certain car choices or other uh, things that they would have liked in their life for the benefit of having the children in neighborhoods to attend these schools. And if the state isn't honoring that social contract, allowances must be made. It's not a question. This is part and parcel to that social agreement. Its part is to, I think, in the more complicated means, as Delegate Cox was talking about, from obligations by statute from the state, that's probably echoed at the federal level. And so if we're breaching that contract, the parents and most importantly, the children must be made whole. So I appreciate that. And again, I speak highly in favor of this bill. I hope that these allowances can be made to get children back into the society of their friends and school choices most beneficial for their families. And once again, thank you for your staff and for your time.
All right, thank you, Mr. McAvoy. I do not see
Madam Chair,
the young
I'm
lady who's here.
Madam Chair, I'm informed that she is in the waiting room under the name Kate Martin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Delegate. We'll, hopefully the staff heard that and we'll let her in. Delegate Rose, you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for the bill. And I'm sorry, I was about 5 minutes late. So if you already covered this, I do apologize. Just one quick question. Do we know of any other states that have either done this or are in the process of trying to do this at this time?
Yes, and I don't have an analysis of all the states, but this bill is modeled on the Pennsylvania method, and the approach was to allow the appropriations for temporary scholarships. So thank you. That's an excellent point. This is something that is being looked at across the country, and our nearest neighbor, Pennsylvania, has my understanding is has an app.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Rose. Delegate Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is for Delegate Cox. Thank you for this legislation proposal. But I have a question as it relates to the authority. I know that the term open is very definitive. And so it is my understanding that school boards make a decision regarding the openness or virtuality or hybrid or any other methodology they decide to use. How then does this bill should not be viewed as a means to circumvent the decision of local boards of education?
Well, that's an excellent question, Delegate. Thank you. The point of this is to allow for the flexibility of the local boards. For instance, when you have a burden on the local system for special needs students, which we have a massive concern about in Maryland with access, this would provide opportunities where people could opt in through the scholarship process temporarily. It provides a temporary alleviation of the burden and of the concern when you have those mandates that in-person is supposed to be provided for certain individuals, or if it's not working for others. So I think when you look at the language, I tried very hard, and I think first of all, it was modeled after other states that have been able to work with this, and the focus is to allow an opt-in kind of approach. So this isn't something that will tie the hands of anyone. It just simply provides, a temporary Band-Aid or alleviation of the problem to make sure that these kids aren't slipping through the cracks while the local boards are trying to navigate this difficult time.
So are you suggesting it's only for special needs? I got the impression it's for any student who wanted to get $1,000 to go to a private school or any other school of their choice.
Yes, that's right. It's an opt-in for any student who may not be able to fully appreciate the virtual environment. I mean, I've heard a few students say that they actually like the virtual environment better, but the vast majority of those who've contacted my office in my district are certainly looking at least other options temporarily while their schools have been shut down. And I know we're moving towards a reopening model, but it could still be, we don't know how this will completely play out. We also know that this has been a problem that has really impacted families financially. So I think it is a temporary, honest and good approach.
Thank you, Delegate Cox. We now have the young lady, Alexis Haslip, to speak. I know your mute is off, but we still can't hear you. Can you try again?
Okay. Is it
There you
on?
go.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Alexis Hayslip. I'm a sophomore at Century High School in Carroll County. I'm a 3-sport athlete and I have a part-time job. I'm the oldest of 5 kids in our family with an 8th grade sister, a kindergarten brother, and preschool twin siblings. When the shutdown happened and we were all working and doing virtual learning, it was nearly impossible as our internet was terrible. There were 4 of us trying to use the internet at once, which caused it to kick us off the system multiple times per day. I was not able to participate in sports anymore. My social life came to a complete halt because everyone was scared of the virus. My parents have looked at homeschooling options to keep our brain engaged and signed us up for other outside activities. In January, Comcast finally came to our road and made the internet available to us, which is so much more better than what we had. My parents had to enroll my little brother into a private school in-person setting because they weren't able to sit with him all day long and helping with his virtual learning. They both work as well. My sister and I are left at home alone all day to do our schoolwork on our own. Little to no contact with the outside world, just watching a screen all day long. The virtual learning has had a really big toll on our mental health. We don't have any reason to try hard. School is our outlet. Yes, our parents are signing us up for outside activities so they can try and create those same experiences for us, but it's all fake. We want to be in school with our friends, playing our sports and learning how to do things kids do. Right now, as if we have no control over our lives. We are just here.
All right, now you're muted. Are you done?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Haslip. We always appreciate hearing from students. Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions for this young lady? All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Delegate Cox. We're done with the
Madam Chair.
hearing on House Bill 266. We're next moving to House Bill 138. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee members. Delegate Steve Johnson here to present House Bill 138, Sexual Abuse and Assault Awareness and Prevention Program, Human and Sex Trafficking. This was a bill that I put in last year after working with the League of Women Voters and Delta Sigma Theta, as well as some other constituents. And when I started researching for this bill, I was pretty shocked of what I found and what I found out about Maryland. So what does this bill do? This bill requires the State Board of Education and certain non-public schools to incorporate education on the awareness and prevention of human trafficking and sex trafficking. This would be taught by a teacher who is trained to provide instruction on the awareness and prevention of sexual abuse and assault be incorporated into the health curriculum for students in grades 6 through 12. Now, the reason that I had this incorporated into the health class was I spoke with a few folks from the Board of Ed, and they directed me to the Director of Curriculum, because several states had tried to do something like this, but they tried to set up a whole new program and to hire teachers to teach this whole new program. And because of the expense of doing that, it just didn't go anywhere. So I thought, how can Maryland be in the forefront? How can we make this happen with our existing resources? So after they directed me to the Director of Curriculums, I spoke with a couple of those folks and asked them if it would be possible to incorporate this into our existing health class. And they said that should be no problem at all. What's the need for this bill? A silent plague has been spreading viciously, corrupting the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. It has been sweeping through Maryland, forcing victims into prostitution and young children into involuntary servitude, as well as ever-growing worldwide industry of harvesting organs. It rids them of their innocence and adolescence. Human trafficking is a pressing public health concern which transcends all races, social classes, demographics, and gender. No population is exempt from the ever-present threat of traffickers. Human trafficking is motivated by greed, driven by quota, devoid of respect of human rights, preying on the vulnerable, damaging the psychological and physical well-being of their victims. The National Institute of Health says the average age of entry into the commercial human trafficking trade ranges between the ages of 12 and 14. Maryland has the second most defendants charged in federal human trafficking cases. That's as per the Baltimore Sun. Education plays a vital role in shaping our children and how they perceive these dangers. Due to our access to major highways such as 95, truck stops, bus stops, airports, and shipping ports, victims and traffickers have told law enforcement that Maryland is a gold mine for human trafficking. We must ensure the well-being of our children and teach them how to be more vigilant and how to defend themselves if they find themselves in danger. I want to give you just a few quick stats. The worldwide human trafficking industry. Now, this does not count the human organ trafficking, because they have not been able to get a handle on that yet to put a dollar amount to try to track that. But the human trafficking industry is $150 billion a year trade. Half of that, actually it's 2/3 of that, are made from sex trafficking. Last year, human trafficking was the third highest grossing criminal enterprise in the world. This year, it's moved up to the second highest. So it's growing. It's important that we do something now, especially in Maryland. Last year on this bill, I had 41% of the delegation as co-sponsors. It was bipartisan support and about half and half when it came to men and women. So anybody that has children, grandchildren, or cares about children was interested in this bill. It has basically no fiscal note, which is why I think in Maryland we can make it happen, since we've incorporated it into our health class. And also the directors of curriculum also thought that we could make this happen. So for those reasons, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 138. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Johnson. Any questions for Delegate Johnson? Delegate Ebersol?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What a great bill to bring forward. I have a bill in another committee that also addresses human trafficking. And it's one of the very first things that was brought to my attention when I was running for office. One of the lines says that this has to be taught by a teacher who is trained in this sort of instruction. And I'm curious, since you say that the curriculum directors are all on with you, I imagine there's something. Is this to train those particular health teachers And is there training out there already, or somebody have to develop it? You know, in other words, tell me a little bit about that part of the bill and the training that's required.
The directors of curriculum thought that they would be able to, with some small training, the personnel that are working and teaching the health class now would be able to incorporate this into their class. I also have been speaking with a human trafficking task force who have been willing to volunteer their services to make recommendations to the Board of Eds on anything having to do with the curriculum and how to teach the class. Hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. You're muted, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Eversole. Delegate Washington, Mr. Vice Chair, go ahead.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything until I heard your voice saying that I can speak now. So,
Oh, your hand is up.
yeah, I know still. Protocols here in Ways and Means. Thank you, Madam Chair and Delegate Johnson. Thanks for bringing this bill. I have two questions for you. One is why just grades 6 through 8, and what prevents a school system from passing out this type of material now without this bill? And I guess my third question, so I don't have two, I have three. The third question would be how many school systems already have this information in a pamphlet form, and how many are passing it out, if you know that information or not?
Okay, let me take the first one. I'm glad you brought that up because actually this bill was supposed to be 6 through 12. And when I got it, it said 6 through 8. So I will be putting in an amendment for it to be 6 through 12. And the second was, I don't know of any school in the state that's actually teaching the human trafficking part of it now. I know there's dangers of dating and all that kind of stuff in health class. That's why I thought it would be a good fit to put it into health class. And as far as them handing out literature and stuff on this now, I can't give you an answer to that. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked if it's if students if they're already doing it, plus why grades 6 through 8, is because it does in the bill. It already says that they shall have education on the awareness and prevention of sexual abuse and assault. And I would think that human trafficking it will fall under sexual abuse or assault. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it should be clear. There should be more clarity to that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the sexual abuse and assault, I think, addresses the physical part of that. Human trafficking education goes more into what tricks do they use to lure these kids in? What tricks do they use to get close to them? What red flags to look for? And then if you do get a red flag, who to go talk to about it. So I think it goes a lot more in depth in the luring of children instead of the actual physical abuse part.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Delegate Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any other questions for Delegate Johnson? All right, we do have, I think, one person testifying on this. I'm sorry, two people. First, Donald Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks, are you here? Donald Hendricks or Edwin Thomas?
I think I'm there, am I?
I see, Edwin, I see.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, Madam Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm the co-chair of the Eastern Shore Human Trafficking Task Force, and we have sent you a letter being in support of HB 138, and I want to just take a minute to add a couple of details to that letter. And by the way, I'm delighted I didn't have to drive to Annapolis and didn't have to find a place to park. There's some advantages to this. At any rate, human trafficking is here. Everybody kind of thinks human trafficking is there, but it is actually here in Maryland. For example, the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network reported that in 2020, just last year, 15 human trafficking organizations were disrupted or dismantled. In 2019, there were 533 hotline contacts from Maryland to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Since 2007, there have been 4,835 contacts and 1,277 victims in Maryland. In 2019, there were 21 active criminal cases in Maryland federal courts from the Baltimore District of the U.S. Attorney. It was the sixth highest in the country. There were 5 new cases in 2019 and 12 convictions. And lastly, in terms of these details, between June of 2013 and May of 2020, there were 679 reports of child sex trafficking throughout Maryland, and almost, if not all, of the county and Baltimore City Departments of Social Services had cases reported. So that was kind of the first thing I wanted to add to the letter. The second thing is our group focuses on public awareness, prevention, and education. When House Bill 138 is implemented, being optimistic, when it's implemented, we will not only have helped prevent students from becoming victims of human and sex trafficking, we will have created statewide a generation of young people who will be publicly advocating and publicly making everyone aware. And these in combination will curtail human trafficking. We do offer one suggestion for amendment, and that is in 7-439, subsection C on the second page. If we could add a date whereby the regulations would be completed and put and applied and beginning to work, I believe that would help get this bill underway. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Mr. Hendricks, go ahead.
Hello?
You have to speak up a little bit.
All right. Is that better?
Better.
All right. Thank you, Chair Keisner and Vice Chair Washington, and the members of the Ways and Means Committee. And my sincere thanks to Delegate Johnson and his staff for continuing their hard work in taking the first step in empowering the youth in the state of Maryland against human and sex trafficking. My name is Kevin Hendricks. 1 year ago, my wife, Kim, and I testified about the importance of this bill. So what has changed in the past year in the state of Maryland with human trafficking? Steady increases each year since 2015 with contacts to the National Human Trafficking Hotline for the state of Maryland. 187 actual human trafficking cases reported last year in Maryland, which has increased every year since 2015, with a total of 1,273 reported cases since 2007, which experts have acknowledged the unreported numbers are much higher. We need to take a bold step in moving HB 138 to empower, equip our children in the state of Maryland against the lures of these predators. Our state has attacked the outcome and results from these crimes head on for the victims. But I believe it's time to flip the model to the prevention and education starting in our schools with grade 6. It is crucial that every child in our state has an opportunity, a chance to receive this valuable information to increase prevention in this hideous crime. The responsibility of not providing each student with this valuable information falls directly on the parents, educators, and lawmakers of this state. Our children are being targeted. I'm pleading with this committee to take a bold and new step to empower our children in this state by moving HB 138 forward. We cannot wait any longer. Let's start prevention today, this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks, for your heartfelt testimony. Really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing that with us today. To the members, any questions for either of the two gentlemen? Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Delegate Johnson. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 138. Next, we have Delegate Bagnall with House Bill 77.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Heather Bagnall, District 33, Anne Arundel County, and I am here testifying on behalf of HB 377, Commission on Student Behavioral Health and Mental Health Treatment. You have my written testimony, so I will try to summarize the necessity of this bill. Students cannot show up ready to learn if they are not emotionally supported in the classroom, whether that be a physical or now virtual space. According to the CDC, 1 in 5 children will experience a significant mental health challenge in their early years. Last year, while working on another bill regarding licensure for behavioral health providers, we identified a disparity in how we provide services in and out of an educational setting. As part of the blueprint for Maryland's future, this committee saw fit to add additional funding for behavioral health and mental health services within the blueprint and to establish mental health coordinators, recognizing that need. However, as was conveyed to this committee last year, the guidance for health services, and in particular behavioral health services in an educational setting, are quite vague. And as there are a wide variety of service providers who provide mental, emotional, and behavioral health services in our schools, we need to take a holistic view of these services and how they are meeting the needs of our students. You will hear from providers as to some of the specific challenges in our current piecemeal approach, and you will see from the written testimony that services are provided by a broad community of school psychologists, social workers, school counselors, nonprofits, school nurses, school-based health centers, and others with a mix of certification requirements under Maryland State Department of Education and licensure requirements under Maryland Department of Health, creating a complicated landscape, service gaps, and a lack of a common language from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Within the existing certification guidance, the reference to mental health, for example, refers to psychological services, and the guidance says only that schools will provide psychological services as they relate to education. We want to ensure that behavioral health services provided to our students in Maryland are not only high quality, but equitable and consistent across schools and providers. But to do that, we need people with the right expertise helping to define and refine that landscape. HB 377 seeks to create a commission to evaluate the entire spectrum of care in an educational setting and evaluate, update, and make recommendations to the guidelines, including but not limited to mental health and behavioral health services, and will be staffed by the Behavioral Health Administration. The commission will report recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly by December 1st, 2021 and 2022. Last year, when we brought this bill before the committee, it was a forward-thinking bill to address the gaps in services and create a more universal language and continuity of services across the entire educational spectrum. However, with the closure of school buildings, the transition to online learning, the added trauma of COVID, and anticipating the additional needs students will have coming back into the physical classrooms, we have a greater need for a commission with the right expertise to meet that need. Behavioral health is already a complicated landscape, addressing the immediate need for IEPs and 504s, the broader concerns of adverse childhood experiences and other challenges. And providers need a common language if they are to be effective as part of the administrative team and the greater school community. You will see 3 amendments from stakeholder groups asking to participate on the commission, and we regard these as friendly amendments and appreciate the willingness of the various providers working in these educational environs to offer their expertise as we try to create a more comprehensive community of services. You will also see the commission has broad support across the provider community. In 2016, this body saw the value of bringing together experts in the field of education to make recommendations for Maryland's education future. We need HB 377 and this commission to help educational systems support that future with an integrated, equitable quality of care across our entire educational landscape. But to ensure we are using our dollars wisely and building a system of support, we need the right expertise addressing this issue, and we simply cannot wait. Thank you very much for your kind consideration, and I request a favorable report.
Thank you, Delegate Bagnall. Appreciate that. Any questions for Delegate Bagnall? All right, thank you, Delegate. Oh, Delegate Washington, Mr. Vice
Yeah.
Chair.
Sorry, Madam Chair, for hopping in here late, but I did want to just ask the delegate if she's aware of the consortium that was placed in the blueprint for Maryland's future, and how that would work in regards to this new commission that's being created, that you would like to have created.
I'm not sure about the consortium. Is it speaking directly to behavioral health?
Yes. In the blueprint.
I would have to look at that. I can't speak to that. I'm sorry.
Got it. No problem. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take the first person signed up. We have Matthew Williams in favor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. and members
Williams,
of
are
the
you
committee.
here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hardly. Can you speak up, please?
Let me just unplug my headphones and try again. Is that any better?
A little better.
I'll hold the mic close then. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Williams. I'm a student attorney with the Youth Education and Justice Clinic at the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law. I testify today in support of House Bill 377 as a representative of the Coalition to Reform School Discipline. The coalition is dedicated to transforming school discipline practices within schools so that our children remain on track to graduate. Many of our children are struggling each day with issues impacting their mental health. A recent study found that from 2016 to 2019, children in Maryland ages 12 to 17 experienced a major depressive episode at annual rates that exceeded the national average. By all accounts, the mental health crises impacting children nationally have worsened over the last several years. As one example, suicide rates in the US for children ages 10 to 19 have risen significantly. The coalition testified in favor of this bill last year. In light of the rising number of children with mental health needs, the call for a commission to study, analyze, and make recommendations regarding these needs was timely and necessary. However, as important as this bill was last year, it is even more important this year. The commission is particularly crucial now in light of the mental, emotional, and physical toll that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacted on Maryland's children. During the pandemic, the CDC has reported significant spikes in mental health emergencies for children ages 5 to 17 years old. Several other studies detail the dramatic deterioration of children's mental health during the pandemic. Children are missing vital daily interactions that in-person schooling affords. Many children are lonely and isolated. Many have withdrawn from school and even their families. And we heard testimony to this earlier on a bill today. As a result, more and more children have mental health needs that are not being addressed. Most children who receive mental health services do so in their schools. This includes children who have experienced trauma. Without school, children have been left without these critical services. The commission would be well positioned to study and analyze the mental health needs of our children. In turn, professionals in our schools will be better able to treat these needs when children return to school. In the end, the commission's work would position students to thrive in the school and beyond. Students who receive mental health supports perform better academically, and these supports also improve behavior and address trauma. For these reasons, as well as the additional reasons set forth in our written testimony, the coalition urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Any questions for this gentleman, for Mr. Williams? All right, seeing none, the next three people signed up are signed as favorable with amendments. So give me 1 second. Gail Martin.
Good afternoon. I give welcome to the members of the House Ways and Means Committee. I'm here, my name is Gail Martin, and I'm here representing NASW Maryland, and specifically the Social Work in Schools Committee that is part of that organization. I thank you for taking up this important issue. I think it's critical for the Maryland State Legislature to know the needs and best practices for supporting mental health and behavioral needs for students so that individual school systems are able to use best practices in addressing these needs. NASW Maryland is very pleased to offer our support for this bill. There are three groups of professionals that support mental health in the schoolhouse: counselors, psychologists, and school social workers. All are all are certificated by the Maryland State Department of Education, and their roles have a lot of overlap, but they also have areas of specialty. In Maryland, school social workers are the only educational professional who are universally licensed under Health Occupations Code in COMAR to provide direct psychotherapy services. School social work's been around in the United States for 125 years, but only made its way to Maryland about 60 years ago in Baltimore City. And then about 20 years later, it started expanding into the rest of the state. NASW recommends a staffing ratio of 1 social worker to 250 students. In Maryland this year, the MSDE reports that there are 894,000 students, and we have 569 social workers in schools this year. By my math, that means we're about 2,800 social workers, school social workers, short of being fully staffed. And that's minimal staffing, because the ratios also say that it should be 1 to 50 for students with more intense needs. Those would be some of our special education students with emotional and behavioral issues. Along with school psychologists and school counselors, school social workers are recognized in ESSA, the federal education law, as specialized instructional support personnel. We have a lot to offer through training and experience about the mental health needs of students in schools. Respectfully, we request that you include a member of the National Association of Social Work Maryland chapter as a member of this commission in the amendment we put forward, and urge you to forward a favorable report on this bill. Thank you very much for your kind attention today.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Thank you for joining us. We next have Mr. Willems.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems, representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. For all the reasons articulated by the sponsor, Delegate Bagnall, we endorse and support this legislation, and yes, have requested that we're able to appoint a representative from MABE, along with a representative from the Superintendent's Associations, Association of Student Councils, and other organizations within kind of the schoolhouse, as someone just put it. And we do believe that this commission could be extraordinarily useful with regard to the quality of care issues that Delegate Bagnall identified. I am not an expert in health or mental health, to be clear, but I do think there's a distinction between the consortium established under the blueprint legislation, which to my reading, although I was pretty sleep deprived by the end of last session when it was added as a late amendment to the blueprint legislation, my understanding from rereading it and looking at it is that it is more to do with coordinating access to services and affordability and insurance, and really providing a network of service delivery assurances for families and students, as opposed to the quality of care issues that are being addressed or to be addressed by this commission. So for those reasons, urge a favorable report, and look forward to participating on this commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. We next have Rachel Faulkner signed up.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Rachel Faulkner, and I'm here with a variety of associations, including the Licensed Clinical Professional Counselors of Maryland, the Maryland Assembly on School-Based Healthcare, and the Maryland School Psychologists Association. And you'll see that we've submitted a couple of friendly amendments for this bill. Just a couple of quick comments about the bill, because I think that the folks that have gone before me have really said quite a lot in support. There hasn't been, I've been working in school behavioral health communities for over 15 years now. And to my knowledge, there's never really been a really good deep dive into all of the different school employed and community partnered professional groups, and school systems to really look at the distinct roles that each of these valued members play in providing mental and behavioral health services in schools. One of the things that I would say about the consortium versus this is the consortium really is looking at a model that relies on community partnered mental health services, which is super valuable. Lots of school systems use these services, but it is a piece of the continuum of behavioral health services in schools. And this really has the opportunity to also look at the school employed personnel. It's a great way when we talk about these conversations in lots of different circles, in lots of different bills, when we talk about gaps, when we talk about ratios, when we talk about the roles of a school counselor versus a school-based health center versus a school psychologist. And we've never really had that conversation with everyone in the same room. The other thing to remember is that a lot of these guidelines are in statute and in COMAR, and looking at what those rules look like. They're disparate in very different places between the health statute and regulations and the education statute and regulations. And so this is something that this commission could take a unique look at that isn't in the consortium, and to my knowledge has never been done before. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Faulkner. Any questions for the three who just spoke, favorable with amendments? All right, seeing none, we have one more person testifying in opposition, Ella Ennis. Ms. Ennis, are you here? All right.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
Okay, good. I'm Ella Ennis. I'm a citizen in Calvert County. And I thank you, Chairman Kaiser, and the committee for letting me speak with you today. When I look at House Bill 377, I take it in concert with the bill that's coming up in another week, a House Bill 132, and with the Kerwin legislation from last year. And it seems that whenever we have a problem, our solution to it is to form a very big commission of professionals, and they come up with a very big bureaucratic plan that costs billions of dollars or millions of dollars. And I'm not sure that we are putting at the center of those plans the children and their families. And I think too often we don't include the family and the parents. And in any of these commissions, you look at the makeup, you don't have anybody representing families or the parents. And I feel that that with this group, this whole issue of transgender children transing when they're still students, they're still children, without any parents involved is very concerning. And when we talk about lowering the age of consent from 16 to 12, children of 12 years old, 14 years old, even 16 years old, change their mind about who they are and how they want to live their life and what they want to do many times over. And what my concern is that when you start lowering the age of which a child can make these decisions, and you have people who are, quote, professionals in a particular field that are not looking at the family as a whole, that sometimes the child really gets lost. And so I really am opposed to this idea of not having parents and family involved. In other parts of the law, we say that a person has to be 21 years old to buy cigarettes or alcohol, or if they're in trouble with the criminal justice system, they aren't considered to be adults and they shouldn't be punished the same as adults. So here we are with children, and we're going to be concerned about their mental and emotional health and their outlook. And we would let them make these changes as children. And I feel these plans are all very professional, but they leave out the family. They diminish the value and the role of family. And that's what I'm so concerned about. And I appreciate your time today. But I can't be in favor of this legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis. Any questions for Ms. Ennis? All right. Thank you, Ms. Ennis. Thank you, Delegate Bagnell, and all the people.
Yes, may I just say one more thing? In my written testimony, I urged you to take a look at this book called Irreversible Damage. And I really hope that you will take that into consideration because there is a lot of very valuable information there. Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Ennis, you spoke to if that this bill doesn't have family or parents in there. If we amended the bill to say that we included family representative or parent on here, would you then support the legislation?
I think that having the family, having some representative that is focused on the family point of view versus the professional point of view, that would certainly improve it.
Okay.
But the same thing is true with the Kerwin, all that commission. There was nobody there to say parents really need to be a part of the development of their child.
Okay. Were you aware that this bill doesn't change the age of consent in the law currently?
I really truly feel that the even 16 is not. Here's the problem.
Ms. Ennis, my question is.
Ms. Ennis, can you just answer the question from Delegate Washington?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is simply, were you aware that this doesn't change the bill doesn't change the age of consent? Were you aware of that this bill doesn't change the age of consent?
This bill doesn't, but there's another bill by Delegate Bagnell, which will be heard in another week, which will lower it to 12.
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure that was clear. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all. Again, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the next bill. Delegate Forbes.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Kathy Forbes. I represent District 42A in Baltimore County. I appreciate the opportunity to present House Bill 468, a bill that will streamline the process of filling midterm vacancies in the Baltimore County School Board. Prior to 2018, the Board of Education for Baltimore County was made up of 11 members, all appointed by the governor, and 1 student member. As a result of legislation passed in 2014, a hybrid, partially elected and partially appointed Board of Education was created. That board was first seated after an election in 2018, and the board includes 7 elected nonpartisan members, 1 from each of our existing councilmanic districts, and 4 at-large members that are chosen by the governor, and the 1 student member. The bill creating this hybrid board also created a school board nominating commission, and that commission is responsible for vetting candidates for the 4 at-large positions and making recommendations to the governor. Absent extraordinary circumstances, the governor must choose the 4 at-large members from candidates that are forwarded to him from the nominating commission. The nominating commission is enormous. It's 19 members, 1 from each of our state legislative district and 10 stakeholder groups that include groups like the League of Women Voters, the Baltimore County Chamber of Commerce, and the Baltimore County branch of the NAACP. The process, by all accounts, for seating the 4 at-large members worked just as it was supposed to. The nominating commission reviewed and interviewed more than 40 candidates and sent 9 names to the governor. And from those 9 names, he picked our 4 at-large candidates. What happened next is why I'm introducing this bill today. In October of 2019, unfortunately, and less than a year into his term of service, one of the at-large members, Roger Hayden, passed away. And following the statutory requirements for seating members, the nominating commission began its work all anew. And because of those requirements, it took 5 months to seat a new board member. With this bill, I hope to create a streamlined process to allow, when we're dealing with single member vacancies, the nominating commission to work more quickly. The original legislation required them to hold 3 meetings, 3 public information meetings in 3 different areas of the county, and getting that school space and getting a number of members from the nominating commission on the same calendar was the thing that the commission members told me drew it out the longest. So in my bill, I changed for when you're appointing a single member, there'll be 1 meeting, but that meeting will be live streamed and that meeting will be archived on the website. So any late filing candidates get the benefit of the information shared at the meeting. And the second part of my bill is what I call building a bench. As I shared, they gave 9 names to the governor and he picked 4, and there were 5 excellent candidates that had been fully vetted, and the commission thought enough of them to send them to the governor. A year later, none of those people applied for the vacancy. And so my bill would allow them to, with the permission of those candidates, reactivate their applications. In speaking to one of those people, the process was very long, and she thought she hit the ball out of the park in her interview with the governor's appointment secretary, and was really disappointed by the politics that she thought were involved in it. And so she didn't feel like reapplying the next time, but I asked if she would have reactivated her application, and she would have done it in a heartbeat. So those are the 2 main changes the bill makes. I'm happy. There are 2 letters of support from volunteer members of the nominating commission, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I ask for a favorable report on HB 468. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Forbes. Members, any questions for Delegate Forbes? All right, seeing no questions, thank you, Delegate Forbes. Appreciate you joining us twice today. First time, of course, being on that joint bill early. All right, next we have Delegate Kelly's bill, House Bill 597.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee for having me here in my second favorite committee in the legislature. I'm here on House Bill 597. This is going to be a sponsor-only presentation. This bill, which has a title, it is a Child Care Center Teacher Qualifications. It's a bill that you guys passed out of your committee unanimously last year, and it also passed on the House floor. It got caught up in the early end of session, so it did not get out of the Senate, but this bill is identical to the bill that you all passed. Just really brief refresher. As you know, it's a really tough time for childcare. This is the bill that would create an alternate path under the probationary teacher qualifications for people who do have a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree. If you remember last year, we had child care providers come in, and you have some written testimony from them again this year, talking about how, there was a tremendous delay in the variances or waivers that they could get if they wanted to hire someone who had maybe a previous career in something else. And particularly now with the challenges facing our child care centers in the workforce shortages, we really wanted to find a way that allowed them to hire these folks who, again, if you see the written testimony, they tend to stay longer in the career. It's a passion for them. So we want to be able to make sure that they're able to be hired in a timely manner while also meeting the same state qualifications that are already in place. So it really just flips the script with MSDE and says, if someone has an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, they can start the pre-service training, they can start the required 90 hours of training, get halfway done with it in one path, get halfway done with it and complete it in a timely manner. Or if their bachelor's or associate's degree is in one of these specified fields in the bill, you can see early childhood education, elementary education, child development, etc. They can get hired right away and complete the 90 hours in a timely manner. So that's what the bill does. I thank you for your support last year, and I really hope that you will support it again this year.
Thank you, Delegate Kelly. Any questions for Delegate Kelly? All right, thank you, Delegate Kelly.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 597. Typically, we now have 3 bills from the Vice Chair, so I think it would appropriately be called Lollapalooza. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Delegate Washington, House Bill 461.
That was good. Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, Delegate Alonzo Washington here, and hi to the members of this great committee, the greatest committee that ever existed. Just wanted to say that I'm here to speak on House Bill 461. This bill, simply put, allows Maryland students to take mental health days as an excused absence. Students will be permitted to take 1 excused mental health day per quarter without the need for a note from a doctor. It is no secret that mental health remains an enormous problem among this current generation of students and generations before. Currently, over 70% of teens say that anxiety and depression are major issues among their peers. Even more concerning, 17% of Maryland students seriously consider suicide. Let's take that in for a minute. That is roughly 1 out of every 6 of our children who are having to go to the classroom carrying this immense mental and emotional burden. The CDC says suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for Maryland youth. As our students start to come back into the classroom in the next year, they will be carrying the physical and emotional trauma of the COVID-19 pandemic with them. Many of our students have fallen ill or have had a loved one pass away as a result of the virus. This legislation becomes essential to ensure our students have every resource at their disposal to take care of their mental well-being. This bill will additionally help to destigmatize the issue of mental health for our students. It is important for students who suffer from mental illness to really understand that these conditions are in fact very common. Between 10 and 15% of all young people are suffering from depression symptoms at any one time. Students should have the ability to take a day off and utilize the resources available to them to ensure their well-being and academic success. Other states such as Oregon and Utah have implemented similar measures in recent years. Maryland should take this next step necessary to ensure our students' mental health needs are met and ensure we are treating mental health and physical health with the same degree of seriousness. With that said, I've urged this committee to move this bill favorably. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any questions? All right, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 461. House Bill 465, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 465, for the record, Delegate Washington here to speak on House Bill 465. House Bill 465 is a straightforward bill that changes the way the state superintendent of schools is appointed and adds additional qualifications to the position. This is a reintroduction of a bill from last session, which passed both this committee and the House. This bill has 2 major components. First, it requires that the superintendent be confirmed by the Senate, furthering the system of checks and balances that is crucial to democracy. Nearly 1/4 of Maryland's budget is allocated for education, which is the largest portion of our state budget. So it's crucial that we have checks and balances to make sure that no one branch of government has too much say in how the money is spent. This bill ensures that the superintendent nominee will be held accountable to the Senate. Secondly, this bill imposes a cool down period, if you will, of one year on members of the Board of Education before they can become the superintendent. It's critically important that the superintendent is the most qualified candidate for the position, but right now, current members of the Board of Education can influence other members to select them as superintendent when the position opens up. Members of the State Board of Education are appointed, not elected. Let's make that clear. So Marylanders have very little representation in how the members of the board and superintendent are selected. The individual who leads our public school system should bring transparency and expertise to the position, not someone with connections to those who select the superintendent. The measures included in this bill ensure that the board will pick the strongest candidate to oversee our schools and our children. This bill comes at a crucial time, in a crucial period in the future of our state's educational infrastructure. With the implementation of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, the next superintendent will have a major role in the transformation of Maryland public school system over the next decade or more. For these reasons, I respectfully request a free report on HB 465. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We do have quite a few questions lined up.
Oh man, there's questions. What? Say no, go ahead.
I'd start with Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, my good friend, Delegate Washington. I guess my question was, in reading the fiscal note about your bill, it talked a decent amount about requiring state Senate confirmation of the state superintendent, something that we've never done in the history of the position before. Your testimony, at least from my interpretation of it, talked a lot more about what I think is a very, very, very good point, not allowing the state board to select their own members, so that it basically becomes an insular culture of we just pick ourselves to be the superintendent. So I guess my question is, I'm very supportive of that concept of let's include that language that says, hey, we can't just pick each other, go back and forth, make it this insular event. But I'm not as supportive of the position that all of a sudden we have to include state Senate oversight for the position that we haven't done for the, I'm just guessing, 40 or 50 years that we've had a state superintendent. Do you have a particular, as the sponsor of the bill, I mean, it's your bill, do you have a particular thought about how to differentiate those two things as to whether or not one is more important than the other, or they're both sort of deal breakers from your perspective?
They're both deal breakers from my perspective. I think they're important. I think they're both equally important.
Why is it important now that the state Senate have oversight that maybe wasn't important maybe when Dr. Salmon was first appointed 5 years ago? I can't remember the name of the individual. There was a woman who was appointed before her that I think moved out of state. Why was it not important or not significant for legislation at that time, but would be now necessarily?
Well, we're in a juncture now in our state's history where we're about to fund our school system at the highest level, and the legislature is about to enable that through the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And I think and I think it's important right now more than ever that the legislature have a say in who leads our school system.
Fair enough, my friend. Good to see you through the virtual technology means.
Of course, man. I can't wait to see you in person. Take that shot. Take that vaccine shot, man.
All right, thank you. Delegate Ebersol?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for recognizing the greatness of this committee, even though Jason Buckle's on it. Okay, the Senate confirmation process is not a rubber stamp, is it? I mean, that confirmation process has actually vetted out some people who were actually going for a job who were either underqualified or not appropriate for the position. Isn't that so?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Guyton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for bringing this bill. As someone who's fairly intimately acquainted with the process of choosing state superintendent, I do see the need for a bill like this, so I'm supportive of it. I do have a question. Is the state's, two questions if that's okay. I believe, and I just to make sure, is the state superintendent the only member, the only secretary of a department that's part of the governor's cabinet, not appointed by the Senate?
But not confirmed by the Senate?
Not confirmed, I'm sorry, yes, not confirmed by the Senate?
I believe so, but let me get back to you on that.
Okay,
I don't know.
I believe that that's the case as well, which also gives us some justification and some reason for putting that superintendent position in the sort of in the same realm as the other secretaries of the larger departments. And then my second—
Delegate Guyton, if I could interrupt you. In addition to the secretaries, I would remind you that there's over 1,000 positions that the Senate does their advice and consent on. So yes, quite a few. Delegate, back to you, David.
Yes, I was saying this one is a bit different than the others. For some reason, it doesn't get that confirmation process. So that would put it in line with the other positions and a lot of other positions. My second question is, have you considered, I just wonder about the 1 year cooling off period. Have you considered extending that in any way to 1 year after the end of the appointment for that person? I could see where that might be an issue that might arise for someone knowing, because we all know that a superintendent position is going to become available and there might be resignations in order to make that happen. So that's just a suggestion. I would ask you to possibly consider extending that a bit. Thank you.
Point taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Delegate Lukey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chairman, do you, I mean, and just estimate is fine. Do you have a sense of how many voters, how many people actually had a role in making the decision to elect you to the House of Delegates?
Yeah, it was probably about 10,465 that voted for me.
Approximately. Yeah. Do you have a sense of how many people participated in the process of selecting the governor of the state of Maryland?
It's probably millions. Right.
I would assume it's in the millions. Do you have any idea how many people participate in the process of choosing the state superintendent of schools who has responsibility for educating hundreds of thousands of Maryland kids?
Probably just a few.
Yeah, it's something like 15 people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
8.
Any more questions? The sponsor only, so we are done with the hearing on House Bill 465. Next, we have House Bill 522. Delegate Washington.
Thank you for my last bill today of, man, that was great. I don't know, that was great.
Lollapalooza.
There we go.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Alonzo Washington here to speak on House Bill 522. This bill prohibits a school administrator or school safety coordinator from directing a school resource officer or SRO or a school security employee to participate in routine school discipline of a student. I proposed this bill multiple years in a row, trying to get this bill in the right posture. I think everyone knows here that I've been a leader on the school to prison, on trying to eliminate or dismantle the school to prison pipeline in Maryland. Just for a statistic, according to MSDE report on the school arrest data, 3,141 students were arrested in Maryland schools in the 2018-2019 school year. 56% of those students were Black, 61% of those students were low income, and 22% were special education students. Also, 33% of students were arrested were for non-violent offenses, which also becomes an issue. The idea behind this bill is simple. Enforcement of school discipline policy should originate with the teachers or school administrators, not from SROs or who are armed or other school security personnel who also could be armed but also have arrest powers. SROs and school security employees should be solely responsible for protecting our students from threats, de-escalating violent situations, and promoting a positive school climate, all of which they still would be able to do under this bill. I know there's been multiple concerns about what the school routine discipline practices mean, and I believe that's something that we can touch on in our committee, in the education subcommittee, as we discuss this bill and other bills dealing with SROs and school security personnel. And simply put, just so you all know, it is true that school administrators and teachers are directing SROs and school security personnel to get involved in routine discipline practices. It is happening in our school. I know it for sure because the school security personnel told me that's the case. So, and this was just last week. So with that, I ask for a favorable report on this bill, and there will be several amendments proposed by myself for consideration in the subcommittee. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any questions for Vice Chair on this bill? All right. And now speaking, I have to double check it myself. I can't even believe it. Speaking in favor of this bill is John Willems.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. Yes, this is when I really miss not being there in person to see the looks on your faces in real time, live and in action. But yes, MABE is strongly supporting this legislation, and we've been engaged throughout the interim between the 2020 session and today in meeting regularly with our school security directors and promoting the dialogue and the need for additional training that really goes beyond simply or merely passing a bill. There is a lot more work to be done to clarify and really rectify the role of school security officials in providing school security, which, as our testimony indicates, we are strong believers in maintaining and preserving the role of our school resource officers, but a distinction between that and the educationally appropriate response of teachers and administrators to disciplinary matters that are often age appropriate and our kids being kids, and that type of behavior should never be criminalized. And we've also engaged with the associations of school principals at the elementary and secondary levels and the State Center on School Safety. And everyone seems to be in broad consensus agreement that there is a need for joint training, shared training across the disciplines of security directors and security staff and educators and administrators on the appropriate roles and what's in the best interest of students relative to discipline and school safety. And so we are all in support of this legislation. And as the testimony describes, we are proud of the curriculum that's been established in Maryland. We thought a week-long 40-hour curriculum was pretty robust when the Safe to Learn Act passed in 2018. I think there's broad recognition that could be greatly expanded and again include this more multidisciplinary approach to training everyone on what's appropriate and in the best interest of students. So urge a favorable report on House Bill 522. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions besides asking Mr. Willems if there's a full moon out tonight, as a few members have suggested already? All right, seeing no questions on that, thank you, Delegate Rose. We have India Ox. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Favorable with amendment?
Good afternoon. India Oaks, on behalf of the Anne Arundel County chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, in favor of House Bill 522 with amendment. A 10-year-old is placed in handcuffs during questioning 3 days after hitting a classmate on a bus. Police are called when a 7-year-old tries to pay for lunch with money marked as play money. A 5-year-old is told that handcuffs will become his best friend when he gets older after walking out of school during class. These incidents involving normal child behavior happened in Maryland, involving students of color, but are pale in comparison to the cases involving the use of force by law enforcement when interacting with students of color with disabilities, who are 5 times more likely to face suspension or arrest. We all want to keep kids safe, but statistics do not lie, and school resource officers, or SROs, do not keep our kids safe from such threats. Between 1999 and 2018, there were only 2 times SROs stopped an active shooter. At the same time, the presence of SROs disproportionately impacts our marginalized populations. Black students in Maryland are 3 times more likely to get arrested, and Anne Arundel County saw an 87% increase in student arrests between 2016 and 2019, the exact same time SROs were placed in all of our high schools. No one disputes that most SROs are good people who care about our kids, but at the end of the day they are trained police. Along with the stories shared at the beginning, there is no earthly reason SROs should be arresting kids for flying a paper airplane, kicking a trash can, or drawing on desks. Finally, I wanted to share these statistics. In a survey, 77% of SROs indicated they arrested a student to calm that student down, and 68% arrested a student just to teach them a lesson. And in a 10-year study released just hours ago by the Sentencing Project, Maryland saw the disparity between Black and white incarcerated youth increase by 49%. No child should be criminalized for childhood acts or disability-triggered behavior, which is why passage of House Bill 522 is critical, with an amendment to prohibit SROs from enforcing not just some, but all disciplinary policies, to ensure SROs are only used in acts of imminent danger, which will close the inequity gap with our most marginalized kids. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions? All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna go to the last person signed up for this bill today, Jamal Jones, who signed up unfavorable.
Hello, everyone. And appreciate the committee for having me today. Just wanted to come up and give some testimony. So my name is Jamal Jones. I work with the Baltimore Algebra Project. It's a youth serving organization in Baltimore City. We work with students on math literacy work, but we also work on student issues of organizing and advocacy. After the 2014 kind of national ethos arose around the Mike Brown incident, and there was a bunch of conversation about what the role of police was in general in society. There started to be some local conversations in Baltimore about school police, and I think that was when the guns in schools bills started to arise. And during that time period, what we started to do was started to work with a bunch of students that we worked with across the city with the math sites around the development of what we called the school police report card, because coming out of that school board meeting that was happening at the time, what we saw was the Fraternal Order of Police arguing very heavily with the policymakers, which was the school board members at the time, and very much so overpowering the few students that were at the table. And so what was clear was that whatever feedback officials were going to have wasn't going to be from students in a very direct or meaningful way. So the school police report card became a tool to develop, essentially to get students direct feedback. And we've been able to collect some data over the course of 2 years in partnership with some other organizations. But essentially what we noticed when we looked at this legislation was that the language in this bill essentially mimics a lot of the language that's in local the local municipalities already. And that hasn't necessarily impacted what the findings are or what the impacts are of school police in terms of the interactions, even down to, and again, I think the delegate mentioned the language around the school discipline being loose. I think like the idea of a trespassing being an actual criminal offense and an actual a reason to call police being confused with school discipline of a student coming back into the school building is very real and something that did occur in Baltimore in 2015. And we also were made aware that there were some other bills in this session that were around school police that may have had some stronger language around either removal or having stronger guidelines for discipline. And we wanted to just urge all of the amendments that the students came up with would have essentially turned this legislation into those. So we just essentially wanted to push for this legislation to either be amended into that one or for us to stop at pushing this legislation, because the concern with this is that it would just mimic what's already happening and it wouldn't actually impact what the goal is, which is to have higher accountability on school police. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you to all three of you who testified. Thank you to the vice chair on his hat trick of 3 bills. We move next to House Bill 439, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Ways and Means Committee for hearing me so many times this week. I'm going to make this super short, so mark that on your card. I'm here to ask for your support of House Bill 439, which is simply instituting a pilot program in 5 jurisdictions to evaluate and provide recommendations to the model policy to improve educational outcomes of our students who are pregnant or parenting each year. This work is proposed and will be undertaken by the University of Maryland Institute for Innovation and Implementation. So you've already heard 2 other bills on this subject in the past week, and I trust that you are all awake and listening. And so I will spare you the justification for this bill and simply ask for a favorable report on HB 439. Thank you very much.
Delegate Guyton, I do have a quick bill. Why do you want this bill analyzed by University of Maryland rather than a part of the Maryland Longitudinal Data System?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. I really do want this bill as part of the Maryland Longitudinal Data System as well. This is just going to give us more timely and more specifically analyzed information for this issue. This is something that actually I will allow my panelists to speak to as well, because they've been working on this for a little while.
We do have 2 more questions now. Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have I thought I heard this bill before, but I know
I heard
that Charles is identified Prince George's, Washington, Wycomico counties, and Baltimore cities. Can you share why? I have no problem with my county being cited. How are these counties and city? How are they? Why were they designated and what criteria did you use?
Sure. I know we have someone speaking from the Institute right after this, and I think she can address that better than I could.
I'll save that question for that person.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions, we'll, that person from the Institute will be second, but first we have Diana Phillip. Diana, are you here? And if not, then we do have from the Institute, Margot Candelaria.
I am here. I'm happy to go first, although I do believe I saw Diana when I logged in, but I can go first. Oh, Brittany is here. Brittany is actually here, I think, in Diana's place. So Brittany, I can go first if you want.
It's
Brittany,
up to you.
All right, Brittany, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure if I was listed under as Diana or not, but good afternoon, Madam Chair and delegates of this committee. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Brittany Ehlers, and I'm a policy and research intern with NARAL Pro-Choice Maryland, and I'm here to express my strong support for House Bill 439, and I'm also speaking on behalf of the Coalition to Reform School Discipline and the Coalition to Protect Maryland's Children. This bill would establish a partnership between the University of Maryland's School of Social Work's Institute for Innovation and 5 high priority districts to collect and disseminate data for pregnant and parenting youth and provide them with the essential resources for achieving their educational outcomes while still balancing their parenting related responsibilities. To talk a little bit about the data, according to aggregated data that was collected between 2011 and 2017, 11 counties in Maryland have teen birth rates higher than the national average, with Baltimore City and Dorchester counties having rates over twice as high. Maryland's public high schools, however, have also reported the lowest graduation rate in recent years in 2018, which attributes to thousands of students dropping out of high school. However, Maryland's public high schools reported that only 49 students formally withdrew during the previous academic year for pregnancy or parenting related reasons, but approximately 5,000 have been categorized as whereabouts unknown, indicating that the students are lost to follow-up. And this represents a large percentage of pregnant, expectant, and parenting youth who are dropping out and unreported by school districts. And if not appropriately addressed, this number will continue to grow. So why House Bill 439? It emphasizes one of the most important aspects of ensuring the success of policies, which is monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. So we've already supported a bill regarding policy updates that specifically strengthen resources for pregnant, expectant, and parenting youth in schools. But now we're expressing our support for this partnership so that school districts can accurately assess the true number of pregnant and parenting youth that are being pushed out of schools because they are not receiving enough support to balance their family and educational goals. The partnership with the Institute for Innovation will ensure this. It will utilize the expertise of principal investigators and researchers with experience in data collection methodologies and will be able to provide continual support and feedback to school districts so they feel empowered to continue supporting these youth. We believe there's a substantial disconnect between the data Maryland has recorded on the number of children born to youth under the age of 19 and the number of students dropping out due to pregnant and parenting reasons. This partnership will directly close these gaps in reporting and data dissemination and ensure that reproductive equity and justice is being achieved for Maryland's pregnant and parenting youth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we'll take the next witness, Margot Candelaria.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Margot Candelaria, Research Assistant Professor at the University of Maryland School of Social Work at the Institute for Innovation and Implementation. And I urge you all to look favorably upon this bill. I won't repeat all of the data on the teen pregnancy rates and Maryland's data collection efforts thus far that Brittany just reviewed. I can jump in response to the questions to say this bill actually perfectly dovetails with the previous bill around getting the data to be in the MDLS system. So my colleagues at the School of Social Work manage that system. We've spoken about how these would actually work in perfect coordination. The problem is right now, I mean, as evidenced by only 49 students being reported as dropping out for pregnancy or parenting reasons, is there's a huge discrepancy between what is happening with pregnant and parenting youth and what's getting reported. So what this bill does is really get districts to understand how do we accurately identify these students? How do we collect the data? How do we report it so that eventually what goes into MLDS is actually strong and accurate? And that will help us then determine what are the supports needed to keep students in school. So I was able to be the lead evaluator on Baltimore City's Pregnancy Assistance Fund. This is all described in the written testimony I submitted. The Pregnancy Assistance Fund nationally is funded by HHS to specifically identify and support pregnant and parenting youth. And what we found is we served over 600, actually almost 700 pregnant parenting youth in Baltimore City within 2 years, and almost 40% of those were kids served in schools. So they were able to be identified and engage in supportive services, not just to keep them in schools, healthcare, parenting, all kinds of programs, social services, material supports that allow them to be not just successful in school, but also successful as parents. So what we really want to do is make sure that we're accurately identifying who these students are so that we can identify what kind of supports they need so that they are successful as students, successful as parents, and later on successful as members of our society and our state. So this bill is really to make sure we are helping jurisdictions. It's a pilot program. We'll start with 5. We'll go through cycles of understanding what's happening now, engaging them and training them how to do a better job identifying, collecting, reporting, cycles of CQI to make sure that it makes sense, the system works, it's not overly burdensome, and then actually, hopefully that can then go statewide. Because this is just a 3-year project, it's not ongoing, and that will feed the MLDS system with more accurate data that we can then continue to analyze, all in conjunction with our partners at the School of Social Work who manage that work.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The question still stands in terms of the 5 pilot. I'm unsure who can.
So originally, this bill was brought forth last year and never really got heard because of COVID and everything shutting down early. We originally proposed trying to do all 24 jurisdictions, and we just realized it would be unwieldy and it would be very expensive. And so we decided to try to focus on 5 representative districts, that was really it.
Okay. All right. I will acknowledge that in Charles, there is a long-standing program. It's called Teenage Parenting Program. It's very comprehensive. And it should give you a lot of data from District 28. Thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions for these 2 witnesses? All right, members, seeing none, no more, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 439. To members, we are next moving on to House Bill 496 from Delegate Wilkins. This is our last bill of the day, but sit back. We have 20 people signed up. Delegate Wilkins, go ahead. House Bill 496.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins, and I'm proud to present HB 496, the Counselors Not Cops Act. This bill will end the state school resource officer fund that expands law enforcement in our schools and redirect this $10 million to instead support mental health services, school counselors, wraparound support, restorative justice practices, trauma-informed schools, and other proven measures to support safe, inclusive, and supportive schools. From several years on this committee, we've moved a lot of important bills. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is our work over time on the school to prison pipeline and our careful study and efforts to advance restorative justice, trauma practices, and increasing mental health services. These proven practices create safe places to learn for our students, they improve wellness, and they support outcomes that are positive for our students, parents, and communities. These programs, they promote safety in our schools, and we should expand them. I believe the goals of safe, inclusive, and supportive schools are at odds with our current funding of the SRO expansion. And it's time for us to reimagine what safety looks like in our schools. School safety isn't just armed officers patrolling the halls who end up driving up arrests and increasing the criminalization of our Black, brown students and students with disabilities. We had 3,141 school-based arrests in just the 2018-2019 school year, over 3,000 arrests. And about 70% of arrests are for minor offenses like disruption, disrespect, trespassing, and property destruction and altercations that don't involve weapons. These arrests disproportionately impact Black and Latino students. For example, Black students are 56% of school arrests in our state, despite being just 1/3 of the student population. Students with disabilities are only 12% of the student population, but are subject to 23% of school arrests, often for disability-related behavior. These arrests traumatize students and cause them to miss school, force them to navigate a complex legal system, and subject them to detention and family separation, which increases the likelihood that they will drop out of school. It's not just about the arrest though. It's also use of force with students, where we've seen students kicked, slapped, punched, taken to the ground. We've seen handcuffing and restraint. And oftentimes students might not be arrested, but they're referred to the justice system for minor violations. And it's the trauma of armed police patrolling our schools. We can't just train our way out of this and make minor modifications in order to address this problem. The fact is that the role of our police is to enforce, and they provide greater opportunity to default to these types of approaches by being in the schools and with this program that really fuels our school resource officers. Imagine a student who's having issues at home, who breaks a policy at the school and is met with a teacher that's trained to recognize and implement trauma practices, referred to a well-resourced mental and behavioral health professional, maybe even a social worker. They're able to access restorative practices in the school to repair harm for their behavior and take responsibility. What if the school was resourced through this bill to not only be a trauma-informed school, but also have social emotional learning programming where the student learns about self-awareness and managing their emotions to help prevent violence and conflict in the school? Now imagine the short and long-term effect on that student and the family and the entire school between that response that I just described and the current default of the SRO when it comes to discipline. We don't have to take a law and order enforcement reactionary approach that punishes our students for routine behavior. And we can't continue to fund and champion a program in our schools that criminalizes our Black and brown students and students with disabilities and call that the interest of public safety. The hope with this bill is that our education systems will shift to a model that prioritizes support services and proactive measures to improve safety. And now is the time to start making this shift. When students return to school, many of them will carry trauma resulting from COVID-19, death, from witnessing police violence, potentially hunger and isolation, and these impacts will likely last for years. Students and families deserve to be met with truly safe schools rather than being confronted with officers. We must embrace them with support and services to recognize their basic humanity as children, not as criminals, and to truly use these methods to keep them safe. I do want to flag that I have at least one technical amendment, and there might be some technical changes coming, but they do not change the substance of the bill. And so in conclusion, let's fund interventions instead of enforcement. And I urge a favorable report on HB 496.
Thank you, Delegate. We have already quite a few questions lined up. Start with Delegate Shoemaker. You're muted, Delegate Shoemaker.
You'd think I'd get the hang of this at some point, but
at some point.
Madam Chair, I appreciate it. You all can put on your shocked faces, I guess, but I come to this bill from the standpoint that, this whole notion of getting rid of police officers and replacing them with counselors is just, and we've seen this phenomena spring up over the last few months, but it seems to me to be complete folly. Just a couple of years ago, Delegate Wilkins, we passed the Protect Our Schools Act. I think we passed it in 2018, as I recall, and it had broad support from both sides of the aisle, and it followed quickly on the heels of that horrific shooting down in Parkland, Florida, where 17 kids, I believe, were killed by a deranged lunatic. And then we had an incident here in Maryland, down in Southern Maryland. And I think that was the impetus for the Protect Our Schools Act in 2018. So you would agree with me, wouldn't you, Delegate, that Protect Our Schools Act, hasn't even been in place a full 3 years yet, right? Because we just passed it late in the session in 2018. Isn't that right?
Portions of it have been implemented, as you know, Delegate. And I would add that I don't think that this issue just sprung up. You might remember, because you mentioned the 2018 legislation, that we had extensive conversations around school resource officers. And that's how many of the provisions ended up being added. So yes, the bill overall had a number of important provisions that I support. That was one that for a long time, I and others in terms of the school resource officers have voiced concern around.
But you would agree with me, though, that, there's no way of knowing what kind of deterrent value these SROs that are placed in these schools have had on potential violence in our school buildings. There's just no way to know that, right?
We do know from research, Delegate, and that's a great question. We do know from research, extensive research all across the state, that has shown us that school resource officers don't tend to deter violence. Mass shooters don't think to themselves, well, this school has a school resource officer, I'm not going to conduct this horrendous act. Unfortunately, what we have seen and what the studies show us is that it has not been a deterrent when it comes to having a school resource officer.
But you aren't suggesting, are you, Delegate Wilkins, that just regarding the practicalities of what you're proposing here with this particular bill, you're not suggesting that some counselor is going to help talk some deranged lunatic off the ledge with an eye towards preventing him from engaging in some horrific mass violence, are you? You're not suggesting that's the case.
I'm so glad you asked that so I can have the opportunity to expand on that point. What I am suggesting is that school safety is broader than school resource officers. I'm suggesting that us continuing our work of having mental health services, strong mental health services, having trauma services and trauma-informed schools and restorative justice approaches, we need to reimagine what safety looks like, and that we can prevent some of the violence and conflict and issues that are taking place in our school from occurring by having these services broadly available. The bill does not prohibit school resource officers. All the bill says in terms of the major provision of the bill is that in terms of the state funding of the $10 million, that instead of using that $10 million to fuel school resource officers and focus in on SROs, it would redirect those funds to these services that I have talked about.
So your response is that instead of the state participating in the funding for these SROs, that money would be diverted to counselors, right?
In mental health and restorative justice, yes.
All right, thank you.
And to clarify, Delegate Wilkins, you're not precluding the locals from spending their money on SROs.
That is correct. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I needed that clarification as well. Delegate Eversole?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a question loaded and I'm going to ask it, but I'm going to say that there's a misconception that SROs were placed in buildings to prevent mass shootings. And the act we passed several years ago, although it added some ability for SROs to react to those, it added a lot more for SROs and what they do in the buildings. So the idea that we are merely putting SROs in there to stop mass shooters is a misconception. In Howard County, they've been in school buildings since 1993, long before we started hearing about these mass shootings. So we talk about school safety there, but let's talk about day-to-day safety in the building. What does research say about the link between SROs and school safety more generally?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you, Delegate Ebersol. Well, the data actually shows us that it actually hasn't found that police presence keeps schools safe. And if you all refer to testimony, the written testimony by Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence and the Justice in Policing and Accountability Coalition, and a UMD professor really expands on this a lot. And even recently, FEMA actually summarized recent studies and says that the data and academic research has shown that school security and the presence of school resource officers, it has little to do in terms of preventing school shootings and reducing casualties. So the research is actually showing us that although it might feel good and safer to have armed police in our schools, we are seeing that when we actually look at data, that it's actually not preventing crime, it's not preventing the mass shootings and casualties.
Seeing no further questions there. Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just preface my question with it's very difficult to quantify and to measure prevention because it's not something that happens. My question to you is that certain jurisdictions, Cecil County, for example, the SROs are really looked to as kind of a guiding light in the school system. You know, a person that students can go and talk to, someone that they can interact with, get advice from. My question to you is this funding that goes along with that, because we know all schools are struggling, why wouldn't you use that funding to either A, train officers in these traits that you'd like them to have, or this education or service, or B, just add to the funding and supplement it rather than supplant it? Those are my two questions. And then if we can't come to some reconcile on that question, would you be willing to make this a jurisdictional opt-in? In other words, if a county doesn't want to take away that funding, they don't have to, but if they want to switch it, they can. So those are my two questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate, for those great questions. So in terms of training officers, we've done that. We have the 40-hour training. We've added to that training. I think that at some point in terms of training, I think that we have done that. So that's the answer to that question. And fundamentally, what this bill is saying, once again, and this answers your question about why not just add additional money to it around this, is that once again, our Black and brown students are being criminalized. We're seeing the arrest rates despite the representation that our students have, and maybe some of them do have great relationships with school resource officers, and I don't doubt that there's some, officers who have amazing relationships and are mentors in their schools and so on and so forth. But we're also seeing, and it's not okay, that this is driving arrests in our schools. This is something that is specifically driving arrests of our Black students, our brown students, and students with disabilities. And so I believe that is contrary to the goals of creating safe, supportive, and inclusive schools. And so that's the reason why I didn't just request that we add money on top of it, but I actually think that in terms of our state goals, that we should not be fueling this practice that is ending up criminalizing particular students.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Hornberger. Delegate Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. I wanted you to maybe give a little more context to, we've been talking about student resource officers as part of a public safety framework, but I do understand that there's also a notion of having a positive school climate, and that in and of itself can be a buffer against certain types of trauma even emerging, helping people to feel safe, being able to communicate in ways that don't escalate to violence. Could you expound about maybe the school climate framework and how SROs are not necessarily a central component to creating a safe, inclusive school climate? And I just have one follow-up question.
Sure, absolutely. Yes. So there is a lot of research and advocacy around the issue of creating school climates that are conducive to be inclusive to all students, to ensure that we are creating sort of a climate where learning can take place and where students and parents and communities can be welcomed. And the types of programs that I'm including in this bill help to create those positive school climates. So they help to create a place where our restorative justice practices, which this committee, again, has been working on for years, which really helps create a climate where our students, before there is harm done, there's peer counseling that can take place. When a situation occurs, such as some of the minor offenses that I talked about, where our students are currently being arrested, instead of that, we can have a climate where there's conflict resolution, there's peer-to-peer support. Students are learning about why their action was harmful and taking actions, take responsibility for it and repair that harm. And what that does is help build community in the school and help ensure that additional conflict and violence does not occur. And this is evidence-based. All of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's the school climate, whether it's restorative practices and trauma-informed schools that this committee has worked on, those are what help to create safe and positive learning environments and improve our school climates to help increase outcomes and also increase safety.
Madam Chair, I just have a very brief follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Just jumping on the theme of creating an inclusive environment. My understanding is that for some young people under the present framework, their introduction to mental health interventions are sometimes coming only after they've been engaged in the criminal justice system, either via a SRO or another law enforcement officer. Can you talk about how bringing more access to mental health and counseling professionals on the front end can prevent perhaps a young person from even having a record in the first place?
Right, exactly. When we have more mental health services in our schools and students have more professionals that they can actually go to and get that kind of support, it works well with the work that we've been doing in that 2018 bill when we're trying to prevent these things from taking place in the first place. And we want to have these leaders and professionals in our schools to help prevent and provide the opportunity for students to get that support. And we should keep in mind that for many of our students, getting that in school is the only place that they will be able to get mental health services. Many families either don't have insurance, or if they do, it doesn't include mental health services, or it's extremely cost prohibitive. So for many of our students, they might be able to access it on the front end just because this is the first and only time that they would have that access.
All right, thank you, Delegate Smith. Delegate Rose?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on a couple of items, one that Delegate Shoemaker brought up, we passed this bill, as I recall, in a very broad bipartisan fashion back in 2018, the very end of session of 2018. When that happened, we were to set up over a period of time, starting in the year of 2018 into 2019, the center, the MCSS Center, that had a number of people in an advisory board. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as I recall, part of the 2018 legislation did address restorative approaches, relationship-focused student discipline that's preventive and proactive, building strong relationships, setting clear boundaries. In addition, and I'm just paraphrasing from the fiscal note, in addition, it did focus on trauma-informed schools, acknowledging the widespread impact of trauma and potential paths for recovery. And there was money put into that initial legislation that was addressing the mental health concerns as an overall very encompassing bill. Is that correct?
Delegate, as I've mentioned in my testimony, this committee has long been doing work on restorative justice practices and trauma and a number of different issues. And yes, I believe that was included in the 2018 legislation. So
since we are just now into the very beginning of 2021, We haven't even had kids in school since just about a year. We really, just to follow up, we really haven't had even time to fully implement all of the aspects of the 2018 legislation. Would you agree to that?
I would say that the issues that I am referencing and the fundamental issue here is around our school resource officers who are driving arrests being at odds with the goals of restorative justice and exclusionary practices that are taking place in our schools. So my answer to your question is that we have the data over several years. We don't have to wait 5 years, 3 years, however many years is appropriate for the implementation of this legislation. I think that the data really shows us the criminalization of Black and brown students, and that needs to be handled.
As a follow-up, one thing that you mentioned was that we don't have any evidence that it's not a deterrent. And just to go back to a couple of the incidents that Delegate Shoemaker brought up, as I recall, and I think many of us will, as we were all together working on this legislation, it came right on the heels of some pretty horrific crimes in our schools. And at the time, I still had a child in public school, in high school. And I just want to tell you that the feedback from our community has been nothing but positive. And I tell you, my son even mentioned to me how much better he felt and more safe that he felt going to school after these horrific events that have happened. And it is true, wouldn't you agree, that since this law was enacted and we had the SROs in the school, we haven't had any mass shootings, thank goodness, in our schools in Maryland, have we?
We haven't been in school for the last year. And once again, Delegate Rose, I'm just summarizing the research, which has been nationwide and has told us that it does not prevent mass shootings. So I don't think that you can make a correlation that the last year we haven't been in school, and then I guess the year before that there haven't been any school shootings. I don't think you can make a correlation there.
But it's really impossible to say, isn't it? Because were there any in 2018 after we passed the bill, or in 2019 before the pandemic in Maryland?
I don't think you can make a correlation there, Delegate.
Okay, we'll have to disagree. And my last follow-up, Madam Chair, when you mentioned, communities could still keep their SROs if they wanted to, but I need to bring to your attention that, a lot of the smaller counties, such as my own, if you take away the funding that comes along with this legislation, it's going to make it extremely difficult for smaller counties that have very, very strong limitations on their budget, especially during the pandemic, to make it possible for us to continue what for us has been an extremely positive relationship between our schools. I've heard from my school board, I've heard from parents, and we've had nothing but positive results from this. And I'll just end with, I really think that you need to allow, each community to make their own decisions. But thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Delegate Rose. The next person we have signed up with questions is Delegate Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Wilkins, for bringing this bill. One of the things that you touched on real quick is about the positive influence that some of our SOR officers have on our schools. Do you have any data or any surveys or anything to, we can actually use that to compare what's actually, what's happening? In order for us to make an informed decision, I know from my district, I know the SRO officers are liaisons, and they interact with the children and the students, and they show a role model to a lot of them. And, sometimes, I know when I was a young man, sometimes it took a little bit of kick in the butt to, hey, straighten up and do what's right. I'm sure a lot of people don't agree with that, but it worked for me. I just like, do you have any information as far as the impact, the good impact that these SRO officers are having on our students?
I do not have that information, Delegate Long, in terms of studies and research. I do not have that information.
Right. Do you think this would be some good information we need to have to be able to look at? Because our students, we want to do what's best for the students. And without that information, I just don't see how we can make an informed decision at this time. I mean, I think it's very important. That's my personal opinion.
Delegate Long, I don't think you understood her answer. I think your question was, does she have data suggesting that SROs are good? And she said no. I don't think she wasn't saying she didn't have data overall.
Yes, ma'am. Madam.
I just want to clarify what I think she was answering. I think she has suggested with everyone else that she does have data on the other side.
Okay. What I thank you, Madam Chair, and I understand that, but I still think it's important that we look at that information, how we could arrive at that information, or how we get that data. I think would be a good thing. That way we can find out exactly how the SRO officers are performing in our schools. If we just keep looking for bad things, we're going to find them. We need to look for some good things and see how that works out. You know, just outweigh the bad. That's the only thing I'm asking. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate, I would say that the research that we do have is shocking and should be enough for us to make drastic changes. I think that seeing that our students with disabilities, our Black students and our Latino students are being criminalized and arrested as a result of our school resource officers should be enough for us to take action. So I'm sure that there are students, once again, who are having positive relationships and positive impacts, but to say that because some might be having positive impacts that that doesn't require change when the data is showing us criminalization of students in our schools, I do not think that that is the right course for us to take. I think this bill is really necessary, but I do appreciate your comment and that feedback.
Delegate Long, I would just further say that she suggests as data, and I think that's incumbent upon you and others who disagree with her to find your own data as well. And rather than asking her to find data, she's already found some data. You can find the rest.
Right, Madam Chair, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just thought it'd be nice if we had both sides of the spectrum to be able.
That's what you're providing. That's what you're providing, and some of the people testifying will be providing.
I'm a little biased.
Okay.
Yes. There are others who have the data, Delegate Long. Delegate Wilkins has the data supporting her side.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill, a very important bill, because I think all of us are tremendously dedicated to our learning environment and making sure that it's healthy and safe for all of the children that attend our schools. But I want to dig a little bit deeper because, and as we've talked offline, I represent a community that is actually self-funded community resource officers in our schools since 1999, since the Columbine incident in Colorado. Our community self-funded that immediately after that horrific incident as a way of protecting all of our children. And over that time, we've had very positive relationships built with our community of color, of many of different ethnicities, and it's been a well-supported program. But I do recognize that the issues that you are bringing forward, as far as particularly, I think, Liz, what I'm hearing you say is that the presence of SROs are driving arrest rates of Black and brown children in our school system. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because, well, number one, I guess my first question is, do you believe that with this bill that removing SROs from the school system will then in fact represent a decline in arrests of our young people? That's the first question.
This bill doesn't remove school resource officers from schools.
Well, by removing the funding, in effect, it does. But
Delegate, I do have to disagree because it doesn't prohibit school resource officers in schools. By removing the $10 million, a lot of jurisdictions, like you said, self-fund school resource officers. So many jurisdictions will be able to continue with their school resource officer program, but I'm hoping that through this legislation, this will help to shift toward broadening the model when it comes to what school safety looks like.
But the ones that do rely on this, that will no longer be that the funding will no longer be available for them. Do you see a direct correlation between the removal of the SRO and then a decline in arrests of these young people?
Well, I think that if we remove school resource officers and don't have other personnel, it depends on if there's other personnel in the schools with arrest power. I think that it's possible, and I hope that arrests would decline. I would say that it's not only the presence of the school resource officers that are driving the arrests. It's also this model that we have where a lot of times there aren't other options in our schools, Delegate, when it comes to mental health services and social emotional learning on our restorative practices. I think that not only is it the presence of school resource officers and therefore there being a default to punishment types of responses to discipline that include arrest, I think that it is also the fact that, and that's what this bill is doing, the fact that there isn't much funding or ability to make sure that we have adequate mental health services and other support. So I wouldn't simplify it as just school resource officers are funneling this, but it's the broader, again, issue of us broadening what school safety and inclusive supportive schools look like.
I do certainly support broadening it, and as we talked offline, I would like to see the inclusion of these additional counselors and mental health people, because I do think that there is a partnership. One other quick question. You cited some research, and I'm sure you'll provide some of that. I don't know if there's specific data that you want us to review, but I will point out one piece of data that I have come across that I think is very interesting, and maybe I'll share this with the committee because I think that this has a broad impact on what we are talking about. And this is a report that was published by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it's called Violence Prevention in Schools, and it is a nationwide review of school resource officers. One of the two major findings of that says that the presence of school resource officers do two very important things. They build trust and relationships in communities that normally would not exist, number one. And number two, that they encourage young people to find nonviolent ways to resolve conflict. And I think that that's very interesting. So I just want to put that out there, and I'll be happy to share it with the committee. And I think this is this certainly is an issue that is extremely complex and requires all of us to work together. So thank you very much, Delegate, for bringing this issue forward.
Thank you, Delegate.
All right, thank you. Next we have Delegate Buckle. Have you already asked a question? I'm trying to move around. Just double checking. All right, Delegate Buckles next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't want to take up too much time. We got to let Delegate Lukey get prepared for his big speech this evening. I want to make sure he shines on the national stage of PT. But I have to tell you, throughout this session at least, my office, we have not gotten any more constituent feedback about any bill our committee has considered other than this bill. It's the number one bill from my district in terms of feedback over the last several days. And I think, Delegate Wilkins, you may or may not remember, my daughter is a school counselor in an elementary school. She has a master's degree in child and educational psychology. And
we already all knew she was smarter than you.
Yeah, she's smarter than me. She's probably going to pursue her doctorate in that field and become a school psychologist and those things. So the first thing that I wanted to say, I have 2 or 3 questions. I'm 100% would give the $10 million. And we've got $4 billion in Kerwin funding. 10 million is a drop in a drop of buckets. We can give the $10 million and hire more of these professionals tomorrow. We should do that. That should be priority 1. So I want to put that out of the discussion. I don't think anybody opposes that. But I do have some questions about this reduction of funding that in some jurisdictions will mean dramatic limitations on SRO. Do you have any evidence to suggest individuals who are being arrested, students in school settings, would not otherwise be arrested for their behavior, but for the presence of the SRO. And by that, I mean, we call it in law, we call it just causation, proximate causation. So if a student beats up another student in school, or bullies another student, or brings in a weapon, or is selling drugs in the bathroom, I'd like to think that that student deserves to be arrested anyway, and that the school, if the school found out about it, if they had evidence of it, would notify the local police authorities and they would conduct an investigation. And so I'm wondering, do you have any evidence to suggest that there are specific instances in Maryland of a child who got arrested solely because an SRO was there, or is it all just sort of statistical analysis?
Hopefully I'm understanding your question, Delegate, but the data that we do have tells us that many times school resource officers are doing these arrests, and that about 70% of them are things that we would consider to be minor infractions, such as disruption and disrespect. And so the basis of this bill, and I actually say I do have to disagree with you, Delegate, is that I think that for most offenses, other than egregious ones, us putting a student on the school to prison pipeline and having them interact with the justice system is unnecessary. Some of these services that a lot of schools don't have access to, if they had access to them, perhaps mental health, social worker, trauma practices could have intervened. Restorative approaches could have been used there for the example that you just gave, as opposed to totally changing that student's life by arresting them.
We just have a fundamental disagreement about, you know, if something of violence is occurring, or threats of violence, or drug dealing, that requires a law enforcement response rather than it's okay, stop doing that response. But I'll tell you that you talk about putting these kids on the school to prison pipeline. I don't know if you know this, but 2 of the largest juvenile detention centers in the state of Maryland are in my county, or in Allegheny County. And I can tell you, because we get updates on them, there used to be 3, one of them was closed. The 2 of them have combined fewer than 100 students today. There's fewer than 100 kids at the 2 largest centers in the state. And so do you have any evidence that there are more kids in the 2 years since we passed this law and maybe increased or supported SROs? Is there any evidence that more kids are getting sentenced to some form of juvenile incarceration than what were back in 2017, 18? Because from knowing very closely the statistics about people that are actually in juvenile detention centers, there's hardly anyone in a juvenile detention. I mean, there were 2 kids that were charged with a murder in Frederick County that never went a day in a juvenile detention center. They just went to counseling, and they have a probationary period. So do you have any evidence that the SROs are leading to more kids going to juvenile detention?
That absolutely, in terms of them later interacting with the criminal justice system, yes. And those are studies that I can share with you, that once a student has that initial interaction with the criminal justice system through their school, that they're more likely to interact with the justice system over the course of their life, yes. In terms of specifically DJS, or if you're saying in the last 2 years and before the last 2 years, I haven't looked at specific time periods. But in terms of when I talk about the school to prison pipeline and how these interactions impact students in the long term, it's pretty well studied that when a student has that interaction, they tend to go on a path that includes other interactions with the justice system. And I do want to point out really quickly as well, because I think this is really relevant, Delegate Buckle, is that not all students, not formal arrests don't happen in every single case. Sometimes students are referred, and the next person that I think is speaking, I would love for her to speak on this if you want to ask this question again. They are sometimes referred by citation to juvenile services, so they don't end up spending time. So when you're saying that there's only 100 students in there, sometimes they enter these students because of the school resource officer and the disciplinary actions, they end up interacting with the criminal justice system and correctional services, but do not always end up serving time there.
Is the student's conduct any part of this in your analysis? mean, sometimes people do bad things. Sometimes kids, I did bad things. I mean, not criminal things necessarily, but I got to be honest with you. It's not like I never had any interaction, I think was your word, with a law enforcement officer between the time I was 14 and 21. I did. I was a young man. I was a boy. I drank. We had fights. Things happened. Is there any part of your analysis that says it's not the SRO's problem, it's an issue of student conduct and behavior that we can improve working together?
And that's what this bill is trying to address, Delegate, is that putting more tools in the toolbox. I think there are absolute circumstances where there are serious, egregious situations that take place that have to be addressed. I think where you and I differ is sort of where that line is drawn. For example, for a school fight, do I personally believe that a student has to be arrested? I don't believe a student has to be arrested for a school fight. And I'll tell you all as colleagues publicly that I did get in a fight before when I was
You are scrappy.
And I did. And I'm so glad that I was not arrested for it, because here I am now today. I was able to reform myself, and I was able to, go back into the school system, take responsibility. And I'm glad that that took place. So do I think that when a fight takes place, a student should be arrested and their entire life spirals? No, I don't.
I don't want to take up too much time. I know we have more panels. I have one question. Do you have any concerns? I know that the role of SROs is not simply about preventing mass school shootings. That's a part of it. That's something that drove our concerns, is we know that our schools were viewed by some as quote unquote soft targets for these type of events, and copycat killers, and students that had issues could come to a school and know, hey, I can walk right in the back door of the school with a gun and start shooting. I can't be stopped. So, but I know it's not the only reason we have them. But do you have some concern from a liability standpoint that if we take SROs away, if we defund them, if school systems say, hey, we don't have these anymore, we don't want police in the schools at all, we're taking away money from local law enforcement coverage, and God forbid, a month, a week, a year, 2 years after we do that, there is a mass school shooting at an elementary school in Montgomery County, do you fear liability concerns for the school systems, for the state, of saying, hey, you were put on notice that these things could happen, you took steps to try to prevent them through whatever means, school security means, and then you took them away, and now something happened and kids are dead? Do you feel—
All right, Delegate Buckle, I think your scenario's out there.
It's not out there at all, Madam Chair. I do this for a living. Believe me, it's not out there.
We have two more people asking questions, and it's been an hour for Delegate Wilkins. So I think the scenario that you're saying, I feel like everyone understands that you're imagining the scenario that there's a school shooting after all this. Delegate
And
Wilkins,
our liability for it if we pass this bill, yes.
Delegate Wilkins with a response.
Just to be brief, I think that this bill works very well with the comprehensive legislation that we passed in 2018, where we have many opportunities, whether it's the threat assessment and many other things that this bill does not change or repeal that are being implemented in our schools. I think that this bill enhances our safety by also hopefully preventing and proactively intervening with the other tools that I have mentioned. So I do not share that fear.
All right. We have two more people if they can keep their questions to be questions, not speeches. Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if I can keep to that, but Delegate Wilkins, thank you so much for bringing this piece of legislation. I really was reluctant to speak, and then I heard some of the questions from our colleagues about what this bill does and the significance of it, and what SROs mean in our public schools. And so myself being the youngest member, I was just in high school just a few years ago with SROs that are funded by this very program. I got to thinking through this hearing about all of the different doomsday scenarios that people are bringing up. And then I remember how many different doomsdays, real horrible days I experienced of my colleagues when I was in school, individuals being arrested for petty offenses. Maybe they were talking back to a teacher. Maybe they were disruptive in class. Maybe they made a joke about our SRO and the SRO wanted to exert dominance over this individual, and they arrested that individual. And I was just thinking, as I'm hearing the various colleagues speak, and I just wanted to recenter the conversation. This bill, as you've introduced, it wouldn't ban SROs across the state. It would just reinvest the dollars into counselors and other professionals that would look to.
Delegate Ivy, you need to ask a question.
Isn't that so, Delegate Wilkins, that this piece of legislation is not to ban SROs, but rather to divert the dollars that are currently being allocated?
Yes, that's correct, Delegate. And thank you for helping to recenter us.
Thank you.
Is there another question, Delegate Ivy?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to be redundant, but my question was simply similar to Delegate Ivy. In the bill, it still gives the school system the authority to hire or to employ SROs, correct?
It does not repeal it. That is correct. So
thank you very much. And the other is with the sub-cabinet, the decision to include a person who witnessed trauma in your sub-cabinet committee is was something you deliberately included, and I applaud you for doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Patterson. Very concise questions. All right, members, that was very comprehensive, and now we get to hear from 20 advocates. We start with Ms. Monisha Sharial.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Monisha Charial. I'm an attorney with the Public Justice Center, where I represent students throughout the state facing suspension, expulsion, and school-based arrest. PJC belongs to the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, which unites over 90 organizations statewide behind 5 police reforms, including to get police out of our schools and reinvest in effective safety measures. PJC and the coalition support House Bill 496. Today you'll hear stories and hard data and research from students, parents, and educators, in addition to advocates statewide, about how the school police model has failed us. It doesn't protect schools from shootings or from any other violence, as set forth extensively in several pieces of written testimony before you. It traumatizes students of color by confronting them with uniformed officers in their hallways. And it disproportionately funnels Black children and children with disabilities into the school to prison pipeline, mostly for minor offenses that they commit because they are kids and their brains are still developing. As you're reflecting on these problems, keep in mind a couple of points related to the solutions. First, I just want to be clear that tweaks to the program, training, or updates to MOUs is not enough. The defining function of school police, like all police, is to enforce the law. This includes making arrests when they witness or are asked to respond to any behavior that could constitute a crime, like that run-of-the-mill fighting or disruption, even if it involves a child. Training or MOU revisions can't change that. And in fact, under the 2018 law and earlier policies in many districts, which have been in place and have been implemented, school police already receive 40 hours a week of extra training. But despite that training, we continue to see cases like the one of a Baltimore County SRO just this past year who handcuffed an autistic 12-year-old for 23 minutes and broke his wrist after training requirements were in place. Training staff isn't enough either. Teachers and administrators should be taught how to de-escalate conflict and resolve student behavior challenges. But as long as they have the crush of an officer down the hallway, it will always be easier to call that officer to remove a misbehaving student, particularly when they don't have other adults and resources in the building. There are models that work. In 2017, Toronto Public Schools, which serves over 250,000 students, removed all on-site police and invested instead in restorative approaches and unarmed, non-arresting safety monitors. Since then, the district has seen declines in police involvement in student behavior incidents, decreases in suspensions, and importantly, to many of your questions, no increase whatsoever in school-based violence. In 2016, Intermediate School District 287 outside the Twin Cities, which serves high numbers of students with social emotional disabilities, replaced all SROs with student safety coaches and invested in a trauma-informed, relationship-based, mental health-driven model to supporting student behavior. Students' arrests did drop from 65 per year to 5, again, in answer to one of the questions. And the school community is not calling for a reversion to the police model or raising alarms about safety. Maryland can do it too. Most of our schools currently don't have SROs and instead utilize adequate law enforcement coverage plans, where they work with county police on emergency planning and response and may employ unarmed guards on site. This bill would not change that. If we shift state funding away from SROs and towards trauma-informed practices, restorative approaches, social emotional learning, all of which have been shown to actually prevent conflict and reduce violence. Again, I direct you to the written testimony for research. Our schools would be safer, not just for some of our kids, but for all of our kids. Thank you so much.
You need to unmute.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Thank you again. Sorry, Ms. Terrell, we'll have some questions right now. I know that you were Delegate Wilkins' #1 person signed up, and then after everyone else, we'll ask questions every 3 to 4 people. Delegate Ebersole?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So earlier heard some commentary using the number of students that were residing in a juvenile facility as sort of evidence that whether or not many students are being arrested. But actually, could you kind of go through what happens when a student's arrested in school in real time for pretty quickly, but also what are the various outcomes besides them ending up in a juvenile facility?
Oh, okay. Yes, I'd be happy to. So if a student is arrested in school, and again, let's assume for now a student who's under 18, they must appear at the Department of Juvenile Services. They miss school, the parent has to miss work. They don't have any right to representation in this initial proceeding. And at the proceeding, they must answer detailed questions about their private lives, previous times they've gotten in trouble, not just with the law, but social history. And then everything rests in the hands of the GJS officer, who has 3 options. They can formalize, forward on the charges, put the child on pre-court supervision with a requirement to complete programming or service requirements within a certain time frame in order to avoid charges, or they can recommend resolving the case at intake. If the charges are forwarded, the child then appears in court, multiple court appearances most likely. They may be detained pending adjudication, and they may well, if found responsible, they are likely to end up in a DJS facility incarcerated, and they will have that record. They will be separated from their family. They will be shipped out, oftentimes far from their home. And then so then in the second scenario, if DJS puts the child on pre-court supervision, he has to enter into a contract to agree to complete special programming, might need to pay fines. And if he fails to complete these conditions on time, the case will be forwarded on for charges. And it's in a fairly short period that they must complete these conditions, including one of the most common conditions is that you regularly attend schools, but often that experience with school-based arrests and the related suspensions or expulsions, or the resulting further suspensions and expulsions that are triggered because the child is now labeled as a problem child, causes the child to miss school, to disengage, and then they end up violating their probation and they end up with their charges, again, potentially incarcerated. And even in those cases where DJS recommends resolving the case at intake, which is most likely really if the child has never had any kind of run before, certainly no prior school-based arrests, the child still has a DJS record, which makes it that much more likely that they'll go through the whole formal process, potentially end up locked up if they get in any kind of trouble again. And I also want to be clear that although these decisions rest in large part with the DJS officer, the SRO themselves can actually appeal a determination by a DJS officer that a case should be resolved at intake, or should be put on a pre-court supervision. And we actually have seen that with SROs appealing cases that DJS don't think belong in the criminal system, and the case proceeding as a result. So bottom line, kid gets arrested, they have a very real risk of ending up in court, facing detention, being separated from their family. They will get a record. And, all that goes, of course, without saying that they will miss school, their family will miss out on work credit. And if the child is over 18, as many of our seniors are, even though their brains are still developing, they're treated as adults and sort of proceed through the process that you all are familiar with.
Thank you. That's detailed and I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I have my chief of staff helping me for the moment here. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to go to the next few people. We have Jorge Benitez Perez. Is he here?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
here.
go ahead.
Can you guys hear me? All right, my name is Jorge Benitez Perez. I am a DACA recipient, community organizer with CASA. CASA is the largest Mid-Atlantic organization in the region with over 100,000 working class immigrant families from Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. CASA operates a total of 10 in-school and after-school programs in Langley Park, Prince George's County, and the Baltimore region, serving over 600 students per year in direct academic programming and organized 1,000 more youth voices into action. I am here today proudly representing CASA and saying that we are in full support of House Bill 496, which will redirect SRO's funds into mental health and youth wraparound services. Through direct testimony with youth in our after-school programs, CASA has heard countless accounts of school resource officers using extreme force on Black and Brown students, including members of CASA. Students from our programs recount escalating conflicts that arose due to lack of communication with school security personnel and the SROs that have used intimidation tactics towards immigrant students by asking them about their immigration status. From 2017 through 2019, CASA saw students from Prince George's County in particular have school-based incidents that they were not directly associated with, escalated by SROs that resulted in the students ending up in ICE detention. As a 2017 graduate of Prince George's County Schools, I witnessed firsthand how toxic the SROs were making our learning environment. We only ever saw them when they were escalating an issue that was already being de-escalated by our security guards in the schools, who we were building relationships with and we knew face-to-face on a daily basis. I went through a minor incident where my immigration status was questioned. The school resource officer asked all my friends, "Are you guys from Maryland?" When he looked at me, he asked me, "Are you born in the United States or not?" That's a question I've never been asked before, especially in a school setting. That question startled me and my friends noticed it. And you know, what made it worse is that it was an officer who was holding a thick packet claiming to be my record and threatening me and my parents to go to court. A school is a sanctuary place where I've always felt safe. And the officer really had me questioning if I would be separated from my parents or not due to a minor incident. My story is one of many felt by CASA youth, and we believe change only happens when we speak up. We must abolish the school to prison pipeline, and House Bill 496 puts us on that path. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, sir. I had a mute while the baby was screaming out. The next person to testify is Angisa Akili McKenzie. I'm sorry if I slaughtered your name.
No problem. My name is Angisa Ichile McKenzie. I am here on behalf of Southern Marylanders for Racial Equality. We work in Charles Calvert and St. Mary's. I'm also a 15-year educator. I'm also the mom of a young Black man who has an IEP and a 504 plan. He's a high school student. And as an educator, I worked in Atlanta Public Schools, DC Public Schools, Montgomery County Public Schools, and Charles County Public Schools. I have seen SROs at work. And I know that there are other solutions if we will not be as intellectually lazy as we have been as adults. And find solutions that are healthy and safe for all students, not just the students that we feel like protecting. Because as the previous speakers have noted, we're not protecting all of our students. 87% of the arrests in my county, Charles County, were Black students, even though our students make up 55% of the student population. We're not protecting all of the students. We have not put the mental work in and use the tactics used in other districts. Even our neighbors, DC Public Schools, utilize a behavior staff. They have people called behavior technicians who actually are civilians. They wear khakis. They build these relationships with these kids that everyone thinks police should have. Oh, let's get the police trained. I think that's mentally lazy. We have civilian people who are professionals who can build these relationships, do home visits, negotiate among fights. And make sure that these kids get these services. So I'm 100% in support of this bill, rerouting those funds. Also, to someone else's point, it's been 3 hours, so it's been long, but there are students who become school shooters. And we know that statistically, based on counseling.org, over 3/4 of those students were bullied. Almost 3/4 of those students had suicidal ideations, and most of those students who end up school shooters end up taking their own lives. They're not taken out by school resource officers. So let's not kid ourselves. We can't make legislation and put police to guard our halls as if they were correctional facilities instead of classrooms because of our own adult fears. We have to think about our children and how they feel. If we get the counselors and school psychologists in there to intercept the children and make sure that the children are getting their needs met, that the bullying is not occurring, that they're having positive and healthy peer relationships, civilians, trained professional civilians, we can get this accomplished without the damage done to all the other students who are paying the price. Specifically in my county, where I've done court watch with my organization and seen a boy who has been arrested 6 times by the same officer starting at age 11 for things as minor as taking a bag of chips from the cafeteria or having a food fight or walking the halls. This young people with IEPs who need extra help. And as a mom of a boy with an IEP, I feel like we have so many other resources at our disposal. So I'd like to give my support, and I hope you find a more intelligent way to handle this instead of a punitive way to handle the situation of school safety. Thank you.
All right, thank you, thank you. Your time had run out, and I missed noticing that there was a question, but I think he just left for a little bit, so we will take the next person signed up, Melissa Goman.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Washington and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Melissa Koretz-Goman. I live in District 20 in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm testifying today in favor of HB 496 on behalf of Jews United for Justice, or JUFJ. We organize more than 5,500 Jewish Marylanders and allies in support of local and state campaigns for social, racial, and economic justice. Our Jewish text teaches us that in all we do, we must work towards justice. Tzedek, tzedek terdaf, justice, justice shall you pursue. And HB 496 brings us a step closer towards that pursuit. I've spent most of my career working on youth justice policy. I'm currently the Senior Policy Counsel at a national nonprofit called the National Juvenile Justice Network. So I have studied the role that school resource officers and other school-based police officers play in driving youth into the juvenile justice system. And unfortunately, they are one of the big drivers of the school to prison pipeline. And most of the youth, as you've heard many others testify to today, are youth of color. What research has not found is any evidence that schools with SROs are actually safer. But what will make schools safer are the types of measures that are in this bill. Methods such as restorative approaches, more mental health staff and counselors, social emotional learning, and trauma-informed care in our schools. This actually does make our schools safer. And I refer you to a recent study, for example, by Johns Hopkins University. They looked at the implementation of restorative practices in 14 Baltimore City schools, and after just 1 full year of adopting the practice, found that suspensions decreased by 44%, as well as improvements in schools' climate and relationships. In our own county, Montgomery County, our Office of Legislative Oversight recently did a racial equity and social justice impact statement of a county bill to remove SROs and found that it would indeed advance racial equity to remove SROs, and also identified several best practices to advance racial equity and social justice. And a lot of these are the practices that are in this bill: more funding for school counselors, psychologists, social workers, expanding restorative justice, and so forth. In sum, children are regarded as the hope of the future. And among Jewish people, this is further enhanced in that children are viewed as a divine trust. And JUFJ respectfully urges this committee to approve these appropriations to help safeguard our children's future and provide a favorable report on HB 496. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. We have one more person, and then we're going to break for questions, and then we will go to more people. Hasaifa Mohammed. Close. I'm hoping I said that close. Go ahead.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Madam Chairman and House Ways and Means Committee members. On behalf of the Council on American Islamic Relations, I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 496, entitled Primary and Secondary Education Mental Health Services Expansion, and also known as the Counselor Not Cops Act. The Council on American Islamic Relations is America's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. Speaking on behalf of all CARE representatives and students currently enrolled in Howard and Baltimore County Public Schools, we have continuously witnessed during our 12 years of public education policies and legislation that have perpetuated harmful school policing models. These measures have been enabled by an annual $10 million fund for each Maryland school district to attain school resource officers, driving the school to prison pipeline. The Counselors Not Cops Act by Delegate Wilkins aims to redirect the $10 million a year School Resource Officers Fund towards student mental health services. The funding would be reinvested into hiring counselors, social workers, and school psychologists to create an improved, trauma-informed conflict response mechanism. If ever a situation occurs for a security or police officer to respond to conflict through the use of force, they will be held accountable to document it. Finally, the School Safety Subcabinet of the Advisory Board will be more inclusive with the addition of specialists in student mental health and conflict resolution, as well as families who have been impacted by school-based arrest. These measures are vital to preventing the criminalization of especially students of color for minor offenses, avoid compounding trauma and affecting academic performance, and building positive relationships among students and staff. This bill will help educators de-escalate conflicts rather than relying on officers who inevitably use excessive force that causes more harm. Students will feel more welcomed in educational buildings when they do not have to fear police in school, a safe place for learning and growth, not fear. Research shows that a police presence in schools does not prevent school shootings or reduce violence. There is no evidence that it improves school atmospheres. To the contrary, it actually adversely impacts students who are disproportionately singled out. House Bill 496 will provide students with the feelings of safety and inclusivity within their schools. It will provide them with better resources that will help improve students' mental health and experiences. House Bill 496 is not only an essential stepping stone in the decriminalization of Maryland's youth, but also necessary in the establishment of nonviolent conflict responses within our schools. It is up to you to allow our schools to become a safe environment for students to blossom instead of becoming traumatized or incarcerated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. Questions, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mrs. McKenzie. She put up the issue on, if you don't mind taking a question, the issue of behavioral health specialists in schools in DC. I was wondering if you can expand on that a little bit as we talk about reallocation of dollars and reallocation of dollars from SROs or school security personnel to things like this, and how effective was it? Did it bring down the suspension rate? Did it bring down the arrests? What were the effects of it? And I know that's not particularly this bill, but you brought up an interesting way to use the funding, right?
Right. And so thank you for that question. So working in DC public schools, there is a model where they have a whole behavior team. So it's like the student dean of behavior, then there's an in-school suspension coordinator. There are behavior techs who are basically kind of on the tier of paraprofessionals, paraeducators. They do a range of things. They have a walkie-talkie, like especially in high schools where there's like multiple floors in the building, they work as a team. And so it's like, well, if there's kids roaming the hallway, they're like, hey, we got some kids on the 3rd floor that are really arguing, let's go talk to them. If they know that there's gang violence, or somebody is coming to school and they're high, or if they're the ones who check their backpacks and say, hey, you can't bring this in, whatever. But it's more of a therapeutic thing because those people build the relationships with the kids. They wear khaki shirt or khaki pants and polo shirts. They look like everybody else in that school building, every other adult. And so behavior techs do home visits if the child has been truant, if they make referrals to social workers. So they write reports. They're like, okay, well, I know that this girl and this girl are fighting over a boy. I don't want it to escalate. So let's stop this before it happens. So that's why I really do think that as adults, it's our job to come up with therapeutic solutions. So I'm really glad. And I don't know the actual, I wasn't one, but I don't know the exact hiring and staffing, on that level of how they coordinated it. But I know that SROs were the last resort and their suspension rates did come down. It was like an intentional plan to reduce suspensions by intervening in students' lives. Maybe they came to school hungry and they were pissed off, and they were angry. Maybe they needed a break. Maybe they needed to, so behavior techs had their own office where kids could come take a break, eat a snack,
or
30-minute cool off and go back to class.
Or maybe they just need a mental health day. I heard a bill.
You got the legislation. So I mean, there are solutions besides people walking around with guns, giving our children permanent criminal records.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Washington. Thank you to that, not exactly a panel, but when we have questions, the next time it will be for the next 4 people who are speaking. So thank you to everyone who just spoke and answered some questions. Next, inviting up India Oaks. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly this time.
Good afternoon again. India Oaks, on behalf of the Anne Arundel County chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice, in favor of House Bill 496. We all cringe after a school shooting and want to keep our kids safe at all costs, which is why there is always a knee-jerk reaction to add more armed personnel after any mass shooting. But statistics do not lie, and all studies show that SROs do not keep our kids safe from such threats, nor do their presence decrease juvenile crimes. And to address a previous question, admissions to detention facilities went down by 52% the first 3 months students were not in schools during the shutdown. At the same time, studies show that additional mental health services decreases misconduct while increasing academic success. We were already facing a mental health crisis before COVID, with 72% of children experiencing at least one major stressful life event by age 18, and these numbers are disproportionately higher for students of color, and needless to say have only increased with so many of our kids facing trauma from the pandemic, which is why we desperately need more mental health support in our schools. But it is not just about hiring more counselors or special ed aides. What many do not talk about is how, when kids experience danger, their fight, flight, freeze response is overactivated, and they may interpret seemingly minor situations as threatening and therefore respond with agitation and anxiety, especially those with sensory disorders and SROs, who only have hours, not years, of training on interacting with our kids, often see these responses as non-compliance or resisting authority, which further traumatizes the child and escalates the situation. Studies also show African Americans are more likely to be shot in split-second decisions, which further adds to that fear by our students of color. We must be proactive, not reactive, in keeping our kids safe, and no child should be criminalized for childhood acts or disability-triggered behavior, which is why passage of House Bill 496 is critical to allow funding to go where it is most effective, enabling staff and wraparound services to take proactive approaches in tackling the why behind our children's behavior, closing the inequity gap, and de-escalating the toxic environment our students face every day, scared of the authority figures meant to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person we have signed up to testify is Jenny Egan. Jenny here?
Yes, hi, sorry, just doing the unmute dance. Thank you, Chairwoman and members of the committee for having me here today. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Jenny Egan, and I'm the Chief Juvenile Defender for the Office of the Public Defender in Baltimore City. Prior to becoming the Chief Attorney, I focused on school-based arrests in Baltimore, and that was my full-time job because it was that big of a problem. Adolescence is a time when kids are discovering who they are, what they like, what they don't like, and who they're going to be in the world. As any of us who went through middle school know, it's a time of incredible discovery and stunning vulnerability. For that reason, I don't want anyone on this committee to underestimate the life-altering impact a single arrest can have on a child. In 2014, I represented a 12-year-old special education student when a Baltimore City police officer, Lakeisha Pulley, chased her down the hall and beat her with a wooden baton, splitting open her head while school administrators stood by and did nothing. Eventually, I was able to secure the CCTV video that showed the assault by the school police officer was unprovoked. The officer was eventually charged and convicted. I will note that her second-degree assault did not prevent her from continuing to be a school police officer in Maryland. But on the day of the incident, this diminutive special education African-American middle school student is the person who was arrested. She went through the process that happens every child who faces a school-based arrest. She was handcuffed, she was placed in a cage, she was forced to sit on a concrete bench for hours, she was photographed, she was fingerprinted. It was a terrifying and dehumanizing experience that sends a message to our children. This is who you are. This is who we believe you are. This is what we think you deserve. Cuffs and cages. That is why one study found that a single school-based arrest doubles the probability that a child will drop out of high school, and a single court appearance quadruples that risk. The stigma of arrest is real. Students with criminal records are often marginalized in school settings and contributes to the normalized expulsion of young people from the education system. The trickle-down effect of having school police officers, because I do not believe these are resource officers. The only resource they offer is law enforcement. Having school police officers leads to repeat offenses and unemployment. Eliminating school police doesn't just, eliminating the funding for school police in this bill doesn't just protect our kids. It has the power to increase educational attainment and reduce crime. I have several comments to Delegate Buckles' questions, and I would love to answer more specifically, but I will not go over my time because I know you've been here a long day already. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Daryl Frazier.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Darrell Frazier. I am a resident of the 45th District here in the state of Maryland. Also, prior outside of my professional environment, I am also very young, and I have not been out of high school for that long, under 7 years. And I also have been a dual system involved young person growing up. So I'm very familiar with a lot of the scenarios that Ms. Jenny Egan and my fellow panelists have also highlighted and stated. I am a policy and community engagement manager for the Mental Health Association of Maryland, which is a education advocacy organization that brings together consumers, families, advocates, and concerned citizens unified to present opportunities under mental health, mental illness, and substance use. In the wake of high-profile school shootings, school districts across the country have invested scarce educational funds into putting more police in schools. However, there is no reliable evidence that school police keep students and educators safe. Alternatively, educators, researchers, and law enforcement have found that strategies to support students' positive behavior and strengthen relationship among student, staff, and parents are effective for keeping schools safe. Today's students are experiencing increased levels of depression and anxiety and many forms of trauma. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the suicide rate among children ages 10 to 17 increased by 70% between 2006 and 2017. Approximately 72% of children in the United States will have experienced at least one major stressful event, such as witnessing violence, experiencing abuse, or experiencing the loss of a loved one. School counselors, nurses, social workers, and psychologists are frequently the first to see children who are sick, stressed, or traumatized, especially in communities with high poverty levels. The benefits of investing in mental health services are clear. Schools with such services see improved attendance rates, better academic achievement, and higher education and graduation rates. And for those reasons, we support House Bill 469. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Next, we have Erica Chavarria.
Good afternoon. I'm Erica Chavarria, a veteran teacher of 11 years, and I'm speaking today as an individual in support of House Bill 496. I feel like I need to start by saying that for many white parents and children, police presence does represent a feeling of safety and positive results. It's nice to have that luxury. That is not the experience for many Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in this country. Second, police have been in schools historically way before the Safe to Learn Act, and they have always been in schools to oppress and suppress Black and brown youth since the 50s. I urge you to learn about that history. In 2019, I was urgently called to the hallway by several of my students to find one of my other students being held face first, flat on the ground by one of the SRO officers and 3 other police officers. I wedged myself between her and the officers and demanded they release her as they tried over and over again to handcuff her. Her body went into complete panic mode and she was unable to even process my whispers in her ear that I was with her. It was later revealed that someone in the building had reported her as an angry Black girl walking aggressively in the hallway, whom they assumed was looking for a fight. Even though she had done nothing wrong, she had to endure the trauma of that interaction with police. 2 other teachers and myself were willing to physically intervene. So thankfully she was not handcuffed or arrested and we were able to get her into a classroom and into the arms of safety. Her family chose to remove her from that school because of that incident. Just within the past month, we have seen horrifying videos of a young boy with autism from Maryland who was handcuffed and restrained for behaviors related to his autism. A young girl in Florida was slammed to the ground by an SRO and knocked completely unconscious. These incidences of police brutality have damaging lifetime physical, emotional, and mental effects on our young people. Even when there is no physical harm done by an SRO, just the mere presence of a police officer is traumatizing, particularly to our Black and brown students, and it interrupts learning, which should be the main focus of our schools. The primary job of an SRO in school is to enforce the law, period. Even if an SRO has formed, quote, positive relationships with students, at the end of the day, a cop is a cop is a cop. They must and they will enforce the law, even with a student who they have built a relationship with. And they do, disproportionately of our Black and brown children, for the exact same behaviors that our white students display. Our white students just don't face the same consequences for their behaviors, and this is displayed in the disproportionality of the data. Our Black and brown students are treated as disposable, and this is inexcusable. Parents who want their children to have police officers as mentors can certainly find those types of programs in the community. Schools are not the place to address historically harmful relationships between the police and Black and brown communities. Children are being criminalized, arrested, and left with records for developmentally appropriate childhood behavior and normal childhood mistakes. I challenge you to think back to when you were a young person. Did you ever make a stupid mistake? Do you believe your mistake warranted an arrest or charge that would impact your college, job, or career opportunities or future in general? Some of you I heard mention that you did make a mistake. Fortunately, for many white folks, their mistakes do not end in consequences that impact their entire lives. What our young people need are more supports in our building who can guide them in learning how to handle conflict and process their
emotions. It's 3 minutes is up. Can you just wrap up your last sentence, please?
Sure. As a trained practitioner and trainer of restorative justice, and as a teacher, I know the importance of focusing our resources towards healing and trauma-informed practices and more mental health workers. That is what we need for all of our children to be truly safe in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I do believe Delegate Wilkins and Delegate Buckle both admitted to misbehaving a few times in the high school years. Do we have any questions for the last four people who spoke? If not, I want to thank you all and thank you for being part of the process today. I'm going to move on to the next group. We have Reverend Greta Willis. And to members, we have 3 pages of those testifying, and then there's 4 pages of additional people who provided written testimony. Reverend Willis, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Kasser and members of the committee. My name is Reverend Dr. Greta Willis. I am the Director of the Community Engagement at Maryland to Prevent Gun Violence, which aims to reduce gun violence in Maryland through evidence-based solutions. I run Maryland to Prevent Gun Violence grief support program for students at an elementary school in West Baltimore. I am also the founder of the Kevin L. Cooper Foundation, named after my son, which aims to mobilize Baltimore City residents to make an impact in the reduction of inner city youth deaths due to violence. I am testifying on behalf of Maryland to Prevent Gun Violence and the Kevin L. Cooper Foundation in support of HB 496. One of the main reasons for stationing police in schools is the belief that doing so will prevent school shootings or other types of school violence. Maryland to Prevent Gun Violence and Kevin L. Cooper Foundation are committed to violence reduction as a shared central mission, but we know that putting police in schools does not actually have this impact. Research shows that the presence of officers in schools does not prevent or stop school shootings or reduce any other type of violent conduct in schools, as detailed in my written testimony. Instead, police presence in schools can traumatize children. We see this firsthand at the Grief Support Program. Many students who participate in the program have witnessed parents or other family members being arrested, harassed, or taken away by the police. Because of this, they constantly report being scared and intimidated by police officers. Even though many of these children have also been touched by gun violence, their experiences with police in the community make them feel less safe. No more saying police in schools. If we really want to keep our children safe in schools, we should invest more in student mental health services, which are severely under-resourced. Many children who have suffered trauma develop a fight or flight response, which means that they can lash out and hurt others when they are triggered. Arresting these children in schools or subjecting them to law enforcement does not improve their behavior. It's just re-traumatize them. In fact, I have observed that some children with histories of trauma act even more if they feel that they are under surveillance by school police. A more effective approach to helping these children resolve conflict and engage with others in peaceful ways is to address their underlying trauma. That includes ensuring that school staff understands and can respond to the impacts of childhood trauma and providing children with comprehensive mental health services at school. Schools become safer for everyone when we adopt these types of trauma-sensitive practices. HB 496 redirects state funds from school policy towards student mental health services and will help ensure that these children are safe and free from trauma in school. Please issue a favorable vote. Thank you.
Thank you. We next have Morelis Urbano.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Morelis Urbano, and I am a senior at High Point High School and also an activist with Casa de Maryland. I am here to tell you, as a Black undocumented student, I find it very disturbing that students of color are being exposed to handcuffs and law enforcement policies at such an early age. And the poor policies that our school have, making it easier for us to be kept in the hands of this system. For example, I was once last year racially profiled, accused with no proof, yelled at, and humiliated in front of everyone at lunch for something that I didn't even do. They needed an excuse to blame me, so I was then told that my hair that was wrapped up in a scarf went against the school rules and that I needed to take it off, and if I didn't do so, I'll be suspended from a school and have greater consequences. This doesn't happen to the non-Black girls at my school whose hair is the standard, whose hair doesn't need hours of work every morning, and the ones that don't need to wrap their hair around a piece of fabric because they're getting late for school. Or regarding to uniform policies, the group of skinny white girls whose bodies are not sexualized no matter how tight their uniforms are. I need you to understand that these poor policies fall more harshly on students of color and put us in direct contact with the justice system. I that day had no other option than to cry on my way to the bathroom, and this humiliating experience of abuse of power lives in my head vividly. I could not even imagine if I would have chose to stand up for myself and things would have escalated. I have seen friends of mine being yelled at by these cops. I have seen people in handcuffs in detention. I have seen students be deprived from their own natural and human feeling of being angry or frustrated. And instead of helping, SROs take this as a threat. We're human beings. We have all the right to be sad. We have all the right to be overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and hurt. And instead of the school providing mental health assistance, the only response that you guys find is to lock us up. This is disturbing. Armed police officers in school are the opposite with creating a supportive, safe learning environment where students can thrive. And even more damaging and re-traumatizing given the fact that we deal with so many negative experiences with law enforcement in our daily lives. For all those reasons above, alongside so many youth from CASA, you should support the HB 496 and redirect funds to mental health and wrapped around services in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for testifying today. Again, we love to hear from students in school. The next person we have signed up to testify is Matthew Vaughn Smith.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Kaiser and members of the committee. I am Matthew Vaughn Smith, rearing a family in District 44A. I am president and founder of the Anti-Racist Education Alliance Incorporated, which advocates for the dismantling of white supremacy in our state schools and the decolonizing of curriculum. I'm a veteran educator of 12 years, having taught all my tenure in Howard County, and now I am a new administrator in Montgomery County. I want to begin my testimony with a story about Damien, a student who I knew as a reading specialist. Damien was a third grader who loved drawing and hugs. Damien was also a child who would leave the classroom in frustration, would make outbursts in class, who wouldn't comply with the teacher's directions, so oftentimes he wasn't available for instruction. The school psychologist and IEP team suspected emotional disability, but the school did not have the resources to provide for his needs. Instead of providing Damien the mental health services he needed to express himself in a healthy way, the school system would not give him those resources until the crisis mobile unit, composed of a police officer and psychologist, had been called enough times to warrant the services. The administrator had no choice. One fateful day, Damien, a Black boy with special needs, decided to leave his classroom again and go roaming the hallways. The school was put on lockdown, and a police officer brandishing a gun came chasing after the third grade boy, who he found rolling on the floor in the hallway. He was cornered and subdued by the police officer and was eventually suspended for the day. I stand on behalf of area and as an administrator in full support of House Bill 496 because I work with Damians every day who have been written off or who the school system doesn't have the resources to help. In desperation, schools are left to default to a dysfunctional school resource officer program that does nothing more than exacerbate the issue. I support this bill because then not only when I became an administrator, I made a vow that I would advocate for equitable outcomes for all children at a school-wide level, especially the Damians. I support this bill because I'm a proud Black father of two beautiful Black children, and I want for them a school system that is a place of learning, not yet another place where they are perceived as dangerous criminals. This bill is one of many steps to ensure that all children, regardless of their race, perceived ability, or socioeconomic status, are guaranteed a quality public education. It removes a vehicle by which Black, Brown, and Indigenous students and other students of color and those with special needs are pushed out of classrooms and into the criminal justice system. There is no empirical data to support that school resource officers work to mitigate behaviors. In fact, the opposite is true. Arrests for childlike behaviors, creating unwarranted trauma for those arrested by students is the norm. Here are some statistics. According to a national study, students in schools are 5 times more likely to be arrested for subjective behaviors like disorderly conduct and twice as likely to be arrested for fighting without weapons than schools without police. In Montgomery County, where I'm an administrator, over 79% of school-based arrests are students of color and 25% of school-based arrests are students with special needs, with only 12% of the school population have IEPs. And furthermore, in the city of Baltimore, where I currently reside, in the 2018-19 school year, Baltimore City School Police arrested 62 students, and of those, 56% were Black or African American.
Mr. Vaughn Smith, I think we have your written testimony, so can you give us
Sure.
Statistics, just your final words, please.
I only run out of time. The disproportionality is stark and cannot be ignored. In closing, I support House Bill 496, and I urge the committee to deliver a report of favorable for this bill.
Thank you, sir. All right, the next person we have signed up is Kayla Moore.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Moore, and I'm an educator in Prince George's County, a former high school graduate of Charles County Public Schools. Today, I'm here to share my experiences and why it is prominent that you support House Bill 496. As a student at North Point High School, I have witnessed on numerous occasions how resource officers brutalize and over-police students. When I was in the 9th grade, 2 young Black girls were having a heated argument, not a physical argument, a regular argument in the hallway. The resource officer came to break up this argument. One of the girls called him the B word, and he completely lost it. She was slammed onto the ground to the point where her chain was broke. She was slammed onto the ground to the point where her chain was broken, and we heard her screaming to the top of her lungs. Fast forward to my 10th grade year, some boys started throwing food inside of the cafeteria, which is normal high school behavior. They were met with pepper spray and handcuffs and were not able to come back to school for 2 weeks. I am not condoning the behavior of my classmates, but I understand child behavior and development. School is a place where students' mistakes should not be treated as if they are adults on the streets or as if they are disposable. Secondly, as an early childhood educator, I am currently witnessing how the lack of counselors, social workers, therapists, and behavior specialists contribute to the increase of undesirable behaviors in children. For example, in my 2nd grade class, I had a student who was known for his behavioral issues. On many occasions, I advocated and recommended therapy and counseling sessions, but over and over again, I was told that we did not have the means to support that and his parents would have to do it on their own. One day, when he was not able to redirect his anger, he ended up stabbing another student with a pencil. Her parents were so outraged that they wanted to call the police on this child. Thankfully, we don't have SROs in our school because I can only imagine what would have happened to that 2nd grade boy. But the point is here that if we had the correct interventions, he would have not done those actions. He would have had someone to intervene and someone to talk to. This was also a child that we later learned was suffering from trauma and abuse at home. So he never had a chance to explain his story, and his only way of showing what was going on at home was acting it out on others. Career Day, which is supposed to be a fun day. And we say that Maryland wants to be trauma informed. On Career Day, where I had about 10 Latinx students in my class, 3 of them bust out crying when they thought that the police officers were coming to our school and to our classroom to present. A Career Day.
Ms. Moore, can you wrap up as the time comes up here?
Yes. So in all, someone who believes in early intervention, I truly support House Bill 496 because we need these resources starting early in our schools so that when kids get to high school, they are less likely to maybe shoot up a school or to harass anyone or to do anything that would be considered for jail time. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions for our last 4 speakers, Reverend Willis, Ms. Urbano, Mr. Vaughn Smith, Ms. Moore. All right, seeing no hands, I will move on to the next group of those who've signed up. We next have Aretha Dorsey.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon to all. My name is Aretha Dorsey. My son, Javante, is a 17-year-old senior at Kent County High School. I support the House Bill 496. I want to share with you why. When Javante was in the 10th grade, he found himself in an ongoing dispute with a boy at the school. Right away, he reported it to the principal several different times. The principal assured myself and my son that he would address the situation, believing him to find that nothing had been done to resolve the problem. And we were never offered a bullying form, considering all of the times that we had actually spoken with the principal trying to avoid a fight. Because the problem had not been resolved, my son was approached in the cafeteria by the boy. He was cussing, yelling, clapping his hands loudly. The boy launched at Javante while spitting in his face. It was too much. Javante and the boy fought. Neither was injured. The officer didn't witness the fight. Javante was suspended for 3 days. The resource officer arrested and referred him to DJS for second-degree assault and disturbing the school activity and personnel. The information in the police report prepared by the officer was not accurate, according to the principal's report to me, but would be the only report that DJS would have to go by. Because of what was not in the report, now my son stood a greater chance of going to jail going to court and going to jail. It was stressful. We were blessed and the case was closed by DJS. And after this experience, I didn't feel that school was a safe place for Javante. And I felt his race was a factor as well, especially there was another incident, especially because there was another incident within that year when he was slapped by a white girl. And the school gave him a day in alternative, him to serve a day in alternative school, even though he had walked away. Imagine how Javante felt after he thought he had done the right thing and even was told that by the principal. And in the same breath, he was punished. I sat there as a witness and witnessed it myself, and I was shocked. But yet, as a parent, I was powerless. My son felt humiliated, first for being slapped in the face, and second for being punished for it.
Ms. Moore, I appreciate your story, and I'm sorry what happened to your son. Do you have one last sentence to wrap up your testimony?
Yes. Imagine if the school had more staff and could mediate conflicts, someone who could deal with anger and anger issues. I feel like that the person that had attacked my son was actually dealing with things like that. So if that had happened, if they were in place, then this situation that we had may not even had happened. So please support House Bill 496.
All right, Ms. Dorsey, and to everyone else, when I stop you at 3 minutes, just say that you support or oppose the bill at that point. That's already a lot of time. Going on to the next witness, we have Lalani Jones-Johnson.
Hello, my name is Leilani Jones-Johnson, and I am a 7th grader at Old Mill Middle North in Anne Arundel County. The police at school, in my opinion, are not needed. There are many white officers, but not one police officer that represents people of color at Old Mill. When I was in 6th grade, I was suspended for fighting, and a police officer who was not on the scene wrote a report that was based on lies and what other people told him. Me and the girl I got into a fight with were off and on friends. Then one day we got into a fight and I got charged with second-degree assault. It wasn't a fight where people had to go to the hospital or get stitches. We didn't even throw punches. The officer that wrote the charges had a friendly relationship with me. He would give me fist bumps in the hallways. He said, quote, "This doesn't change anything about our relationship," unquote. Of course, it changed everything as he treated me like a criminal. After I got the charges, I had to appear in front of a DJS staff member, which was over 7 months later. The charge was later removed and replaced as a warning. Many of my peers had other interactions with this school police officer. One interaction stood out to me. One of my peers was skipping class and the officer was called to take him down to the office. I'm not saying that he should have been skipping class, but the consequences he got was unnecessary. He got 5 in-school suspensions for 1 day. The mindset that many Black teenagers have is that police officers are horrible, and it doesn't help when we get arrested in school for making small mistakes. Most interactions don't feel good with police. So do I think that police should be out of schools? Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. 1 second. We next have Jamal Jones.
Hello, everybody. Thank you again. Jamal Jones, co-executive director of the Baltimore Algebra Project, working out of Baltimore City, math literacy, youth organizing stuff. Wanted to come out in support of this bill. I think it's real central, as a lot of folks have seen and kind of spoken to already several times over, the necessity to invest at a foundational and a institutional level, like how to increase the number or the amount of access we have to counselors in schools. I think that this fund is a wonderful a wonderful space to take those funds and actually reinvest them in that way. I think that schools are generally not in need of school police in the same way that a lot of the folks that have asked questions in terms of the legislators. I do also want to point out that this issue feels very race related. I want to point out that the vast majority of the legislators who had questions that was surrounding the validity of data, the questions surrounding what might actually happen, which is like lack of proximity and lack of like necessary.
Mr. Jones, we don't ever question the reason why people are for or against something, so I would ask that you not suggest that. We don't assume anything about people's motives.
Okay. So essentially, I guess getting back to the testimony, basically what I was getting at is that there's a very clear need to put those funds back into those types of resources like community organizations, counselors, and all of those types of things that ultimately are on the front end of these types of issues and actually lead to preventative measures that are quantifiable as opposed to what's happened with police traditionally. And I also want to highlight with Ms. Egan's testimony, the officer that she's referring to, a lot of the reason why she was able to go and receive employment also as a school police officer is because of the protections that are extended to school police officers as a result of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. And in the context of students and having students be prepared and be protected, it does not seem in good conscience something that we should do, given the national landscape of what we see happens when police have misconduct and the types of protections that does happen as opposed to what is or isn't afforded to students. And lastly, I'll just land that school police were not intended when they started to stop mass shootings. If you go back to 1967, it initially wasn't even a school police force for Baltimore City, at least. It was a security division, which could be, again, to some of the folks who've asked what would be in place of it. There are other options of what folks could be doing for that. And so it wasn't until later on that actually turned into school police. So I want to challenge folks to go beyond what has existed before and move towards something new. So supporting this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We have our last person in favor of the bill, Rachel Faulkner.
Hi, good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Rachel Faulkner here with the Maryland School Psychologists Association and the Maryland chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, both favorable with amendments. And I won't go through the amendments. They're just, they're technical amendments to really align with existing roles of school social workers and school psychologists. I'll be very brief. You heard me talk earlier today about the gaps in schools for behavioral health services. You know, I think unfortunately, when we talk about behavioral health professionals in schools, we're really, there's a huge gap between what these folks are trained to do, the potential of what they can do in schools, and what they actually have time to do because of lack of resources. And so, the word prevention is something that I think they all want to be doing. And unfortunately, a lot of times don't have the capacity to do because there just are not enough behavioral health resources in schools currently. So both organizations are very much in support of this bill and capturing additional dollars for behavioral health services in schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from this last group of I think Miss Dorsey, the young lady, and I forgot to thank her, Miss Leilani Jones-Johnson, the 7th grade students. That was always great. I think you're our youngest person today, so thank you so much for testifying. Or Mr. Jones or Miss Faulkner. All right. Seeing no questions, we do have two people signed up unfavorable. We'll start with Tammy Fraley.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, no, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair Washington. My name is Tammy Fraley, and I live in Allegheny County, Maryland. I have two children that attend public schools currently and two children that have graduated from public schools in Maryland and West Virginia. I'm speaking today as a parent with children in schools with SROs. One of my children currently serves on his school safety patrol in cooperation with his assigned school resource officer and the 5th grade teachers. They have seen a reduction in truancy, less referrals for behavior, and so much more because of the school resource officer. In full transparency, my husband served as an SRO in Allegheny County for 14 years. However, he is now employed as a prevention resource officer within the state of West Virginia. As a parent, I feel that the safety and security of schools depends on a full wraparound of services to ensure the whole student succeeds. This would mean social workers, school counselors, restorative approaches practitioners, behavioral specialists, community support coordinators, physical health services providers, educators, and school-based law enforcement. Maryland legislature passed the Safe to Learn Act in 2018 based on what you all thought was appropriate at the time. In my opinion, to take that away during this difficult time for students, families, and educators would be an injustice, as the funding of every local jurisdiction is already stretched. Why take funding away? Why not have the expansion of the funding to include all necessary services and not removal of the funding specific to school resource officers? Allegheny County, as many others I assume, relies on the funding from the state for the adequate coverage for not only school-based law enforcement, but also social workers and behavior specialists. Will the removal of funding remove the adequate coverage requirement for the schools that was in the Safe to Learn Act? After signing up to speak, I had several contacts reach out to me and provide me information. One thing that hasn't been stated through all this testimony is the number of incidents versus the number of arrests. In Allegheny County alone, which is a much smaller school, we have 8,500 students. The average number of incidents is 900, and the average number of arrests is less than 20. In Calvert County, with 16,000 students, the average number of incidents is 1,500, with the average number of arrests of 150. I know for a fact that many SROs have prevented school-based violence by their mere presence, and from students who have contacted an SRO to prevent these things because they have a relationship with their SROs. From the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, an SRO is a resource. They're not just an officer. They're there to help find solutions. The officer is often the conduit between other resources outside the school system as well as in the community. So I want to lastly say, you should recognize that in just last year, the Maryland School Resource Officer Program nationally was recognized, with Baltimore County Police Officer Danielle Moore, who was recognized as the National School Resource Officer of the Year.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Can you, your last sentence, do you support or oppose the bill?
Yes. So I'm speaking today in opposing the bill for defunding school resource officers. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last person to speak today, John Woolhams with the final word.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Woolhams representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. You have my written testimony. On behalf of MABE, we are in opposition to the legislation, recognizing the merits of everything you've heard, and MABE has certainly worked cooperatively with Delegate Wilkins in support of expanding trauma-informed education, and with Delegate Vice Chair Washington and others on the committee in support of expansion of awareness and funding for restorative practices. And there is a lot to tout in terms of the merits of the legislation in terms of staffing. A couple things I would point out. The vast majority of school systems did have SROs before the grant program was established in 2018, but that funding has been utilized to secure essentially a guaranteed pipeline of funding for those positions. So there is the concern with how that would be sustained going forward without the state grants. But at the same time, grant funding is difficult to utilize to fill FTEs, full-time permanent positions. And so would encourage the committee to look forward to the passage of the blueprint and instituting the enhanced foundation funding and the other targeted funding in the legislation, which should be a guaranteed 10-year flow of funding to actually fill professional positions. Very difficult to do so through grant funding. And lastly, look forward to working with the committee, as I know amendments were referenced with regard to House Bill 522. There is SRO-related legislation pending in the Senate as well that's a little different, and we recognize that this legislation will be worked on and developed through the subcommittee as we proceed from this hearing, and MABE looks forward to being at the table to do so. But we do request an unfavorable report on House Bill 496. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have questions for both Ms. Fraley and Mr. Willems. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Willems. Mr. Willems, you represent the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. So those are like all the boards of education in the state, right?
Yes.
How do they vote for, what's the process for them to vote in favor of legislation? And how many, let me ask this, I don't care about that. How many boards of education voted in favor, voted against this bill?
Delegate, it's our practice not to reveal individual specific votes from our legislative committee. We also operate on what our bylaws refer to as sufficient consensus. So there are bills that we take no position on that resulted from very close votes, or even a small number of jurisdictions taking a pointedly different position than the majority of members. This legislation includes the staffing ratio study and ramp up that reflects legislation that we opposed in a prior session. So we do rely on precedent for that.
I'm sorry. So let me be clear. So there wasn't a formal vote on this particular bill of this year for this particular piece of legislation.
The committee was no. The committee
there was no formal vote of all of the boards of education on this particular bill.
It was presented at a meeting of the MABE legislative committee at which the vast majority of school systems were represented, and our position was stated at that meeting.
Got it. Okay. Because I just know that Prince George's County Board of Education would not have supported, would not have been opposed to this bill, knowing that they could use the money for mental health issues and other issues. So I'm pretty sure that my board did not vote to oppose this bill. And if I'm wrong, let me know.
I don't believe you're wrong, Delegate. And look,
Okay.
we had a bill on Monday that would also be important to you, and the vote was right down the middle, 9-9, and
Absolutely,
no
I
position on
understand.
that.
I just want to make it clear that you represent the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and not all of them agree, and some are smaller than others. And so just so the public knows that not all boards of education agree with this position.
And Mr. Vice Chairman, if I may, we also always emphasize to board, particularly new board members and our member boards, that everyone is free to take whatever position they desire as a local board. We're in no way controlling or whatever attempt to in that regard.
Thank you, and sorry for being an impetus of more questions.
Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question too is for Mr. Willems. Does MABE support additional mental health and behavioral health resources for schools?
Delegate, absolutely. And so it is a facet of our support for the establishment of the Kirwan Commission and its recommendations. We were not and have not been completely satisfied with that process. We are 100% in favor of the veto override, to be clear, but the balancing of employee raises and increased numbers of professional staff, expansion of pre-K, and overall funding increases for the per pupil, amounts for the high-risk categories of students, it was a balancing act. And so the Kerwin recommendations and the blueprint, I think could be accelerated relative to staffing in some of these behavioral health and mental health positions, not perhaps fully anticipated by the commission's recommendations, and the 10-year ramp up of the funding. We are fully supportive of expanded funding and services in this area. Yes.
And does MABE believe or take the position that enhanced mental health supports and restorative practices and other things that this bill would support actually improve teaching conditions and learning conditions in schools?
Yes, and so we have featured now for several years at our conferences heightened awareness among board members about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs process, and the value of restorative practices, and other issues as such as white privilege and institutional racism and bias that have come up in other proponents' comments today. So as an association, we feel that we have been proactive rather than reactive to some of these issues. And actually a former local school board member, it does happen to be a former Prince George's school board member, is the National Director of Equity for the National School Boards Association. And so yes.
So MABE supports these services, believes they improve both teaching conditions and learning conditions, but would oppose directing this state funding to support them?
So the balance.
I just want to make sure I understand your position.
Right. So the balance here is in shifting the $10 million away from SROs to creating a grant program for school systems to access to enhance those specific staffing positions. So it's the specific approach proposed by this legislation that we are concerned with, along with what is, I think, laudable in terms of having plans to get to the national recommended ratios, but it's extraordinarily expensive based on where we are today, and so more work needs to be done, toward that goal as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delia Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Willems, just to kind of circle back, I've been in touch with our school board members and also our sheriff's department in the implementation of the 2018 bill. Is it your understanding, kind of circling back to my earlier question, weren't there trauma-informed practices and interventions put in place, and weren't we giving some support and funding to the mental health, which I think we all agree there needs to be more put towards these needs?
Yep, Delegate, it's a good question. I mean, one of our concerns with some of the initiatives at the state board level in terms of adopting regulations and policies transitioning to the progressive discipline approach and requiring more in-school non-exclusionary discipline practices, for instance, is that the resources have not been provided to enhance staffing in those areas. And so, part of this, and we greatly appreciate all the work that the General Assembly has done, to sustain education funding over the years, but is that we are still operating on a funding platform that was established in 2002. And so we are not adequately funded, we firmly believe, or equitably funded across the state to adequately staff these support positions. And so as important as they are. So it is a gap, and we recognize that.
Just to follow up on that, in my discussion, and I brought this up earlier, I think a big problem with this bill and with some of the smaller counties, I spoke with our law enforcement, and if this money is diverted from the SRO program, we will not be able to continue what has been a highly successful program in our county in Carroll, because that is used for hiring and also for the important part that has been brought up many times today with the training. And so would it be fair to say that we are not the only county that is in that position, and that it could be a very big problem for what it has been for us, a highly successful process?
Yeah, yes, it is. And the Safe to Learn Act, I mean, we do feel took a balanced approach in establishing both positions and provided state funding to support them of the mental health service coordinator at the system level and the school security director position. So both of those positions, sort of, you know, complementary positions were funded and have been since then by the Safe to Learn Act. And so we like that as a holistic approach. We also like the local discretion on how to implement programs and services within those kind of two overlapping spheres, you know, of services, if you will, rather than, for instance, we opposed any mandate that we provide SROs. There was an initial proposal that we be required to have SROs in high schools and then in middle schools and then in elementary schools. And we vigorously opposed that, again, kind of one size fits all approach is not reflecting where local boards wanted to be.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Delegate Rose? Or anyone else? All right, to members, we are done with the hearing on House Bill 496. Thank you to everyone who testified today on this bill. Appreciate it. Hope everyone was paying attention to the chat there at the end as well. To members, we are done with the hearing for today. To everyone listening in, we will be taking up these bills on various days over the next 2 months of our session. Are there any announcements from subcommittee chairs regarding voting tomorrow? Delegate Wilkins?
Yes, Madam Chair. The Election Law Subcommittee, we will be voting and discussing several bills tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Please also check your emails for amendments on bills that have been distributed, and we'll be ready to go tomorrow.
Thank you. And I believe revenues will be meeting at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And local revenues will be meeting at 12:30. And we will all be voting as a full committee on Friday, I believe at 11:30. Just pay attention to your emails in that regard. And we do have a hearing on Friday afternoon. So the timing of Friday hearings has begun. All right. If there's nothing else for the good of the body, I'll see y'all tomorrow.